The first thing you notice is the smell. Before your eyes open, before you understand where you are or what has happened to you, before any thought forms clearly enough to be called a thought, the smell arrives, and it is nothing like anything you have encountered before. It is not a single smell. It is a layered, living thing. Wood smoke threaded through with something animal. Bread baking somewhere close. Beneath that, something older and organic, the kind of smell that cities accumulate over centuries of human occupation, waste and stone and food left too long in the heat. And beneath even that, something earthy and mineral, the smell of a river in summer, of mud baking dry at its banks. You open your eyes. The light hits you immediately, and it is not gentle. It is Mediterranean morning light in July, or perhaps August, a light with physical weight, pressing down on everything it touches. It does not filter. It does not soften. It falls on the stones at your feet with the directness of something that has crossed millions of miles to land precisely on this particular alley in this particular city on this particular morning. And it has no interest in your comfort. You are lying on stone. Actual stone. Not pavement in any modern sense. Not concrete poured smooth and painted with lines. These are large, irregular blocks of volcanic rock set into the earth, fitted together by hands long dead, worn into curves and dips by millions of footsteps over hundreds of years. The stone is already warm beneath your hands even at this early hour. You press your palms flat against it as you push yourself upright, and the texture of it, rough, pitted, ancient, is the first confirmation that something is profoundly wrong. You sit up. You look around. You are in a narrow passageway between two buildings. The buildings are taller than you expected. That is the first surprise, and there will be many. When most people imagine ancient Rome, they imagine something low and spread out, a city of columns and open plazas, a city that breathes and opens itself to the sky. The reality is immediately, physically opposite. The buildings on either side of you rise 4 and 5 stories above the street, their upper floors jutting outward on wooden supports, narrowing the strip of visible sky above you to something little wider than a ribbon. The sky, where you can see it, is a blue so saturated it seems almost unreal, a blue that belongs to paintings rather than meteorology. The walls around you are faced with plaster, much of it painted, not white. Romans do not particularly favor white. The plaster is terracotta red, deep ochre, a warm, dusty yellow that the morning light turns into something almost golden. In places, the plaster has fallen away to reveal the brick beneath, small fired bricks set in courses with careful precision, the mortar between them gone dark with decades of moisture and grime. Names are scratched into the wall at eye level. Drawings, numbers, political slogans that you cannot read, written in a Latin script that your eyes cannot decode into meaning. The walls are covered in text the way that a modern city is covered in advertising, not occasionally, but everywhere, continuously, as though the Romans understand that any available surface is a surface that might carry a message. You stand. Your legs are unsteady, but they hold you. The alley you are standing in is perhaps 2 meters wide, perhaps slightly less. The stones beneath your feet slope gently toward the center, where a shallow channel runs the length of the passageway, cut directly into the rock. You will learn what that channel is for very soon, and you will wish you had not. For now, you simply step over it and move toward the sound, because there is sound everywhere. You notice the smell first, but the sound is extraordinary. It is not the sound of traffic, not the particular drone and honk and mechanical rumble of a modern city. It is something older and more complicated. Voices, hundreds of them, layered on top of one another in a continuous human murmur that rises and falls like breathing. Somewhere ahead of you, metal strikes metal in a rapid, rhythmic pattern. Somewhere above you, a woman is shouting, not in panic, but in the particular tone of someone conducting an argument they have been having for years. A child is crying, not the sharp cry of sudden pain, but the sustained exhaustion cry of a child who has been awake too long. A donkey, and this will startle you because you were not expecting it. A donkey is producing a sound somewhere nearby, that impossible combination of groan and scream that carries through stone walls as though they are not there at all. You walk toward the end of the alley. You turn the corner, and Rome unfolds. The street you step onto is not wide by any standard you are accustomed to, perhaps 4 or 5 meters across. But compared to the alley, it feels like an open road, and the contrast is immediately overwhelming because the street is full. Not crowded the way a busy sidewalk is crowded, not people walking in organized streams in a single direction. Full in a different sense entirely. Full the way a river is full. Full in every possible dimension and with every possible thing. There are people. Of course, there are people. This is a city of approximately 1 million residents, which makes it the largest city in the Western world at this moment in history, and which means that even at this relatively early hour of the morning, the streets are populated beyond anything a modern person from a comparably sized modern city would expect. Because a modern city spreads its million people across hundreds of square kilometers of suburbs and parks and dispersed residential zones, while Rome concentrates them, compresses them, into an urban core that you could walk across in a single morning. The people moving past you are not wearing togas. You expected togas. You will encounter togas eventually, but they are not what the street is wearing at this hour. The toga is formal dress, the Roman equivalent of a business suit or a ceremonial robe, and it is worn for specific occasions, visits to the forum, appearances before magistrates, public ceremonies. On an ordinary morning, on an ordinary street, the ordinary Roman wears a tunic. Just a tunic. It is a simple garment, a length of wool or linen sewn into a rough T-shape, belted at the waist, falling to the knees. On men it is short. On women it falls lower, layered with another garment over it, and sometimes a rectangle of cloth wrapped or pinned around the shoulders. The colors are unexpected. You imagined white. The reality is color everywhere, not the vivid, saturated colors of modern synthetic dye, but warm, earthy, natural colors that seem to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it. Saffron yellow, deep terracotta, muted green, the green of olives and sage, brown in many shades, undyed wool, which is not white but a soft, warm gray cream. And occasionally, on certain people who move with a particular confidence, a stripe of color at the hem or the shoulder, the colors that indicate something about rank and belonging, about where in the vast Roman social architecture this particular person stands. You watch them pass, and you realize immediately that you do not know how to read what you are seeing. A modern city is full of legible information. The logos on clothing, the style of a haircut, the make of a telephone visible in a pocket. These things communicate identity in systems that you have spent your entire life learning to read. Here, the signals are different. The quality of the wool, the cut of the tunic, whether the sandals are leather or rope, whether a man is clean-shaven or bearded, and in what style the beard is kept, whether a woman's hair is elaborately arranged or simply wound at the back of her neck. All of these things communicate, constantly, rapidly, to everyone around you, information about class and status and occupation and origin. And you cannot read any of it. You look down at what you are wearing. Whatever you had on before you arrived, jeans, perhaps, or trousers, or a dress, looks nothing, absolutely nothing, like anything on anyone around you. The cut is wrong. The material has a texture that Romans do not produce and do not recognize. The colors, if your clothing happens to be brightly colored, are too consistent, too chemically pure, achieved by processes that do not exist in this world. If there is any writing on your clothing, a logo, a brand name, even a small decorative script, it is writing in letters that do not exist in this alphabet in this century. Your footwear is wrong. If you are wearing modern shoes, they are immediately and obviously different from anything on any foot in this street. You are wearing a kind of costume that no one around you can categorize. This will matter. It will matter more than you currently understand. But you do not understand that yet. You are still simply standing at the edge of the street, pressing yourself against the wall, trying to take it all in. The street rises gently ahead of you. Rome is not a flat city. It is a city built across and between and on top of 7 hills. And between those hills run valleys that have been filled, over centuries, with the accumulated debris of urban life. Old buildings demolished and new ones built on top of the rubble. The ground level rising year by year so that what was once a valley floor is now simply the bottom of a steep urban canyon. The street ahead of you curves around one of these gradients, and the buildings on either side follow the curve, their upper stories casting complex shadows that stripe the road with light and dark. The road surface is remarkable. These are not cobblestones in the rounded, ornamental sense. They are large, flat-topped blocks of basalt, a volcanic stone called silex, quarried from the hills and rivers around the city, fitted together with extraordinary precision. The surface is not smooth. It is deliberately textured, the tops of the stones slightly convex, the joints between them serving as grip for horse hooves and cart wheels. In the middle of the road, at regular intervals, there are stepping stones, large blocks raised above the general level of the street by perhaps half a foot. You will understand their purpose within the next hour. Along both sides of the street, buildings open directly onto the pavement. There are no setbacks, no lawns, no landscaping of any kind. The city meets the street at a vertical wall, and the wall is interrupted every few meters by openings. Some of these openings are shops, not shops with glass fronts and organized displays. Shops that are simply open rooms at ground level, their entire front wall folded back or removed during business hours so that the interior is continuous with the street. In each of these rooms, work is happening. In the first one you pass, a man is baking bread. You smell it before you see it, and when you see it you stop, because the smell of baking bread is perhaps the only thing in this street that is completely familiar. The oven is a domed clay structure at the back of the room, its mouth glowing orange-red. The baker is already at work. He must have been at work since before dawn, since the bread he is pulling from the oven with a long-handled wooden peel is already finished, round loaves scored with lines across the top, their crusts dark and hard, piled into baskets at the front of the shop. There are customers already. A woman exchanges something, small coins, though you cannot see clearly, and takes 2 loaves away wrapped in a cloth. The bread is real. The bread exists right in front of you, close enough to touch. Your stomach, registering this information, contracts sharply. You have no money. This thought arrives with a specific kind of clarity that is different from understanding it abstractly. Here, 20 meters from where you woke, is food. Actual food, warm and smelling of everything your body currently wants. And there is no possible way for you to have it. You keep walking. The next opening is a workshop. A man and 2 younger men, probably apprentices, possibly enslaved workers, are working metal over a small furnace. The hammering you heard from the alley was coming from here. The metal worker is making something small and precise, fittings, perhaps, or hinges. The sound of his work is a continuous, syncopated rhythm that you will hear, in variations, throughout the entire day. Metalwork, woodwork, textile work, stonework. Rome is a city of workshops, and the workshops are everywhere, embedded in the ground floors of residential buildings, set into the walls of public structures, occupying the arched spaces beneath elevated roads and aqueducts. The manufacturing of objects does not happen in industrial zones far from where people live. It happens here, in the middle of everything, at street level, generating heat and noise and smell as a continuous byproduct of urban life. You walk on. The street grows busier. It is, you gradually realize, getting louder in a way that suggests progression. The city is waking up, or rather, the city is transitioning from one state to another. Rome has been awake for hours already. The Romans rise with or before the dawn, and the first hours of the morning are devoted to a set of social rituals that have no real equivalent in modern life. Wealthy Romans receive visitors in the first hours after dawn, clients, people who exist in a relationship of formal social dependency with a patron of higher status, who present themselves at their patron's door to pay respects and receive, in return, a small gift of food or money called the sportula. This morning ritual, the salutatio, has been happening since the sky began to lighten. By the time you wake in your alley, it is already winding down, and the people who participated in it, the patrons and their clients, the freedmen and the slaves who managed the household, the doorkeepers who controlled access, are now dispersing into the streets. Added to them are the workers, the craftspeople and shopkeepers who have been at their stations since early morning. The men who work the docks along the Tiber, unloading grain barges from Ostia and wine from the islands and olive oil from Spain. The water carriers who fill their amphorae at the public fountains fed by the aqueducts and carry water to the residents of upper-floor apartments who cannot access the street-level supply. The slaves of wealthy households running errands. The street vendors who have set up their portable stalls at corners and in doorways. The men who maintain the roads. The priests who open the temples at dawn for the morning sacrifices. All of them are in the street. All of them have somewhere to go, something to do, someone expecting them. All of them belong here in a specific and verifiable way. And you are walking among them with no destination, no purpose, no name that anyone here would recognize, dressed in something that does not exist, speaking a language that has not yet been invented. You follow the street as it opens into something larger. A broader intersection where two roads meet at an angle, and at the junction, a small fountain. Not a decorative fountain in the modern sense, not something designed to be looked at. A practical object. A stone basin, rectangular, perhaps waist-high, fed by a lead pipe emerging from the wall behind it. The water flows continuously, an overflow pipe at the side, sending the excess into the channel that runs along the edge of the road. People stop at it. A woman fills a clay jug. A child drinks directly from the overflow, catching the water in cupped hands. Two men stand near it talking, using it as a meeting point in the way that people will always use water in a dry summer city. You are thirsty. You realize this suddenly and completely, the way thirst announces itself when you stop moving and give it your attention. Your mouth is dry. Your throat has that specific tightening that means your body has begun calculating its water deficit and has found the number unsatisfactory. The fountain is right there. You walk to it. You hesitate for a fraction of a second. There is something in you that wants to hesitate, some inherited hygiene reflex, and then you bend and drink from the overflow, cupping the water in your hands the way the child did. The water is cold. It is astonishingly cold, significantly colder than you expected, because it comes from deep underground, from the source of one of the great aqueducts that supply this city. Rome maintains, at this moment, several major aqueducts capable of delivering hundreds of millions of liters of water per day. And the water in this pipe has traveled tens of kilometers underground through stone channels before arriving at this basin, maintaining its deep earth temperature throughout the journey. The cold of it against your lips and on your tongue is the first uncomplicated pleasure the city has offered you. You drink. You drink too quickly, and the water sits cold and heavy in your empty stomach, and you stand up with water dripping from your chin and your hands and feel simultaneously better and worse. The woman who was filling her jug has paused and is watching you, not with hostility, with the particular expressionless attention that people give to something unusual, something that requires a moment of processing. She looks at your hands. She looks at your clothing. She looks at your face. Then she picks up her jug and walks away, and you watch her go, and you feel the specific loneliness of being watched by someone who has nothing to say to you. You step back from the fountain, and you look around properly for the first time. You are standing at the edge of a small square. Not the great civic plazas you may have imagined. Not the Forum Romanum or the Imperial Fora, which are elsewhere in the city. This is a neighborhood square, a local expansion of the street grid where a few roads converge and the buildings step back slightly to create a space perhaps 30 meters across. It is a functional space, not a ceremonial one, and it is being used with the unself-conscious efficiency of a place that knows exactly what it is for. There is a shrine here. This will be one of hundreds you encounter today. It is set into the wall at the corner of two buildings, a shallow niche perhaps the height of a man, plastered and painted inside, containing small terracotta figures and a low shelf on which someone has placed a bowl of grain and a small oil lamp burning despite the morning light. The painting behind the figures depicts two young men, the Laras, the guardian spirits of this neighborhood, this crossroads, this particular piece of Roman urban geography. Below the niche, the wall is darkened by the smoke of many lamps over many years. Someone has woven fresh flowers into the frame of the niche, wildflowers, already beginning to wilt in the heat. This shrine is not a landmark. It is not a tourist site. It is a piece of neighborhood infrastructure as ordinary and necessary as the fountain. The care of the local Laras is a civic responsibility managed by elected neighborhood leaders, the vicomagistri, with genuine seriousness. Religion in Rome is not something that happens in a single designated building on a single designated day. It is woven into the physical fabric of the city at every scale, from the tiny neighborhood shrine to the great temples on the Capitoline Hill, and it is practiced continuously, casually, as a normal part of daily life. The woman who passed this shrine on her way to the fountain almost certainly paused for a moment. She almost certainly made some small gesture, a murmured word, a slight bow, before continuing on her way. Not out of fervent personal devotion, out of the same habit and civic obligation that leads a person to stop at a crosswalk signal, because these are the rules of the shared space, and the shared space functions because people observe them. You look at the shrine for a moment, and you feel the distance between yourself and this world most acutely here, not because you are irreligious, but because this particular form of sacred geography, this particular understanding of divinity as something present and local and requiring ongoing management, is so completely alien to any framework you carry with you that you cannot even begin to position yourself within it. You look away. There are 6 or 7 stalls arranged around the edges of the square. These are not permanent structures. They are portable, improvised, their owners arriving each morning with their goods and their equipment and setting up in the same spots they have occupied for years, by custom if not by legal entitlement. One man sells herbs and dried flowers, bundles of them hanging from a pole above his head. One woman has a collection of small clay oil lamps for sale, stacked in a careful pyramid. One man, old, patient, seated on a 3-legged stool, appears to be offering some kind of personal service. There are people approaching him, speaking to him, and he is writing something on a wax tablet in response. He is a scribe, you eventually realize. A professional letter writer, here in the square, serving the Romans who are not themselves literate enough to manage their own written correspondence. Literacy in Rome is widespread by ancient standards and uneven in ways that a modern person would find surprising. Many Romans, tradespeople, craftspeople, merchants, are functionally literate, able to read notices and labels and keep simple accounts. But the literacy required to compose a formal letter, to navigate a legal document, to draft a petition to a magistrate, that is a different skill, and the men who possess it occupy a genuine economic niche at the bottom of the professional hierarchy. The scribe at his stool is not a scholar. He is a service worker, like any other. None of what you are observing is accessible to you in any direct way. You can see it. You can watch it. You can study faces and gestures and guess at meaning. But the language, the continuous stream of Latin spoken around you at every moment, remains a wall. A thick, impenetrable wall that turns every conversation into something observed from outside a window, every transaction into a pantomime, every piece of information posted on every wall into marks that your eyes see as marks and nothing more. You have studied no Latin. Or if you have studied some Latin, perhaps a few phrases from school, a handful of words, you are discovering now that Latin as it was actually spoken in the streets of Rome in the 1st century of the Common Era is nothing like the formal, careful, vowel-precise Latin of textbooks. This is a living language spoken at speed, with the full compression and slurring and regional variation of any vernacular. It has slang. It has rhythm. It has the particular music of a language shaped by a Mediterranean climate and the social dynamics of a very specific kind of urban life. The Latin of Cicero, the Latin of textbooks, that Latin is to this spoken street Latin what formal Shakespearean English is to the way English is actually spoken in a working-class neighborhood today. You would not understand Cicero either, but at least Cicero is careful with his syllables. You choose a direction and begin to walk. There is no reason for the choice except that the street in that direction seems to open up, seems to promise space. You will learn today that choosing a direction based on the appearance of space is almost always misleading in Rome. Rome does not open. It deepens. The street you turn onto runs between taller buildings. 5 stories on the left side. The ground floor is occupied by a series of single-room workshops and shops. Above the ground floor, the building becomes residential, a structure that the Romans call an insula, literally an island, which is what these multi-story apartment buildings feel like in the urban fabric. They are everywhere. They are, statistically, what most of Rome looks like to most Romans most of the time. The great temples and basilicas and imperial monuments are real, and they are magnificent, and they make up the visual identity of Rome in every reconstruction you have ever seen. But they are not where a million people live. The people live in the insulae. The insula above you is a building of typical construction for this period. The lower floors of brick and concrete, the upper floors increasingly of timber framing. This transition matters. The lower floors are solid, relatively fire-resistant, relatively weatherproof. The upper floors are cheaper to build and dramatically less safe. Fire is Rome's constant companion. The city burns regularly. Fires start in the workshops, in the open hearths of upper-floor apartments, in the bakeries and foundries, and when they start, they travel through the timber upper floors of the insulae with a speed that the bucket chain brigades, the vigiles, Rome's combined firefighting and night watch corps, struggle to contain. You don't think about this now. You walk. The smell of the street changes as you move. Near the bakery, it was yeast and wood smoke. Near the fountain, it was stone and cold water. Now, as you pass what is evidently a fuller's workshop, recognizable by the large clay vats visible through the open front, and by a smell of extraordinary intensity, the air becomes almost a physical challenge. The fuller's trade depends on urine as its primary cleaning agent. Human urine, collected in large pots set out at street corners for public use, carried to the workshop in quantity, and used to clean and treat the woolen cloth that is one of Rome's primary textile products. The ammonia content of aged urine is what does the work. The smell of it is what tells you, from 20 meters away, that you are approaching this kind of business. You do not stop to observe the fuller's workshop for long, but you notice, passing it, that there are men inside working the cloth with their feet, standing in the vats, treading the wool back and forth in the liquid the way you might imagine grapes being pressed for wine. This is skilled labor. The men doing it are not performing a degraded or shameful task by the standards of their world. They are tradespeople, doing what tradespeople do, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of people engaged in useful work. One of them looks up as you pass and watches you for a moment with the blank, assessing gaze of someone who has seen many people walk past this door and has developed the useful skill of reading them quickly. He watches you for slightly longer than he watches most people who walk past. You keep walking. The street opens again, not into a square this time, but into something wider, a broader road running at an angle to the one you have been following, and along this road, running its entire visible length, a continuous row of stalls. You have found a market. Not a market in the sense of a single organized space. Not like the great covered markets that Rome also has, the Trajan's market with its stacked tiers of shops carved into the hillside, or the specialized markets for particular goods. This is a street market, a spontaneous commercial event that happens every day on this road because of the foot traffic the road generates, because of its proximity to one of the neighborhood's larger public spaces, because the pattern of urban commerce in Rome, like the pattern of urban commerce in every pre-modern city, clusters along routes of movement rather than in designated zones. The stalls extend for perhaps 200 meters in each direction. You stop at the edge of them and simply look, because this is genuinely extraordinary. The variety is overwhelming. Food. Primarily, Rome's street markets are fundamentally food markets, because feeding 1 million people in a city without domestic refrigeration, without large-scale private food storage, without the possibility of most apartment dwellers doing any significant cooking, open fires in upper-floor timber apartments are a catastrophe waiting to happen. Many Romans in the insulae eat their main meals from street vendors rather than cooking at home. Feeding this city requires a continuous, city-wide commercial operation of remarkable sophistication. There is fish here, laid out on marble slabs. Rome's wealthier residents will pay extraordinary prices for fresh fish, and the fish trade is one of the city's most lucrative. There is salted fish in amphorae, the kind called garum, a fermented fish sauce that the Romans use with the same comprehensive enthusiasm that a modern Southeast Asian cook uses fish sauce, as a condiment and a cooking ingredient and a flavor base for everything. The smell of it is powerful. You have possibly smelled something similar before. You have not smelled it at this scale and in this heat. There are olives in clay bowls, dozens of varieties, different sizes and colors and preservation methods. There are vegetables that you mostly recognize: onions, garlic, leeks, cabbages, turnips. There are herbs tied in bundles. There is fruit, figs, primarily, the fruit most associated with Roman street food, dried and fresh both. There are pears and apples and grapes. There is honey sold from clay jars, the vendor using a wooden paddle to transfer it into customers' containers. There are nuts, walnuts, pine nuts, chestnuts. And there is bread everywhere. Not just loaves. Flat bread, sold warm, served with a small cup of olive oil for dipping. Bread with olives pressed into the crust. Bread layered with soft cheese. Bread that has been dipped in honeyed wine. There are prepared foods as well, sold from small portable stoves. These are vendors serving the function of fast food, providing hot meals to the people of the city who cannot cook at home. A thick lentil soup, ladled from a clay pot into a customer's own bowl. Sausages cooked over charcoal. Chickpeas fried in oil. Something that looks like a flat omelet, set on a piece of flat bread and handed over as a complete meal. The smells layer and mix until the overall effect is almost synesthetic, a physical experience of abundance that your body reads as food, even when your nose is actually receiving 20 different signals simultaneously. Your hunger, which has been a background condition since you woke, sharpens into something more insistent. You walk slowly along the edge of the market. You look at everything. You are trying to find something you could have, some possibility that your situation has not already eliminated. You are searching, in the way that the truly hungry search, for an overlooked resource. There is none. Money functions here. Barter functions here, in a limited way, for those who have tradable goods or skills. Charity functions here, but Roman charity operates through specific social networks, through the patron-client system, through religious institutions, through the obligations that bind communities together, and you are not inside any of those networks. You are not Roman. You are not a freedman or a slave attached to a household. You are not a foreign trader with a letter of introduction and a bale of goods to exchange. You are not a foreign dignitary whose unusual clothing might be explained by the fact of dignified foreignness. You are simply wrong. Wrong in ways that are difficult to articulate, but immediately apparent to anyone who looks at you for more than a moment. You watch a transaction. A man, middle-aged, solid, his tunic faded but clean, approaches a bread vendor and exchanges a small coin. The coin is tiny, smaller than a modern coin, a rough-struck bronze disc. The vendor takes it, barely glances at it, and hands over a small round loaf. The transaction takes perhaps 4 seconds. It has a rhythm of absolute normalcy, of 1,000 repetitions. The man takes the bread and walks away, tearing a piece from it as he goes, already eating, already thinking about whatever comes next in his morning. For seconds, a coin smaller than a button, a loaf of bread. The gap between you and that transaction is, in this moment, absolute. You leave the market. You have no choice. Standing in front of food you cannot buy, in a city where everything costs something and you have nothing to offer, is a particular kind of suffering that serves no useful purpose. You turn away from it and walk in a new direction, following the slope of the street upward, because the ground rises here and you have some instinct that height will offer perspective. The streets steepen slightly. The buildings press closer. You are moving away from one of the city's broader commercial arteries and into a residential neighborhood, one of the hundreds of distinct vici, the local quarters that each have their own character and their own social logic. This one is quieter. The workshop noise fades behind you. The smell changes again, becoming more domestic. The smell of cooking fires, of linen drying in the air above your head on lines strung between the upper floors of facing buildings, the smell of the water that someone is throwing from a second-story window onto the street below. You flatten yourself against the wall a fraction of a second before the water hits the stones in front of you. This is something that Romans accept as a feature of city life. The contents of upper-floor chamber pots and basins emptied into the street below. There are laws about this. The laws, like many Roman urban regulations, are regularly observed in the breach. You have been lucky. The water that just missed you was relatively inoffensive, the kind that comes from washing. Not all of it, at all hours, is as benign. You begin walking more carefully, with more attention to what might be falling from above. The stepping stones in the road surface, which you have noticed at intervals since you woke, make more sense now. When it rains, and Rome does receive rain, particularly in the shoulder seasons, and when the various liquid contributions of urban daily life accumulate in the street, the stones allow pedestrians to cross from one side to the other without stepping directly into the flow. The channels cut along the sides of the roads, and the central channel of the narrower alleys, are part of the same drainage system, directing liquid downhill and eventually toward the city's great drain, the Cloaca Maxima, which empties into the Tiber. Rome has infrastructure. Rome is not simply a collection of buildings. It is a managed environment, designed and maintained by a civic administration with genuine engineering sophistication. You begin to understand this more fully as you walk, as the evidence of it accumulates around you. the lead pipes emerging from walls at regular intervals, connecting the city's water supply to the public fountains and to the private connections of the wealthiest residences. The curbs and gutters. The road surface, maintained at public expense. The posted notices on walls, which you now understand to be official communications, magistrates' announcements, electoral endorsements, lost property notices, the posted schedules of public entertainments. But the sophistication of the infrastructure only sharpens your own position. This is a well-administered city. Well-administered cities keep track of their residents. They have bureaucratic systems. They maintain records. They have people whose job it is to notice things that are not in order. This thought sits at the edge of your consciousness, not fully formed yet. You are not ready to follow it to its conclusion. You file it and keep walking. The street levels out, and you find yourself at the edge of something larger. A public space of a different kind. Not a neighborhood square, not a market street, but something with genuine civic scale. It takes you a moment to identify it even with modern knowledge, because it does not look like what you imagined it would look like. This is a basilica, one of the large covered public halls that serve Rome as a combination of business center, court, and meeting space. The building before you is long and rectangular, its front colonnade open to the street, the columns thick as tree trunks, the entablature above them already warm in the morning light. People are moving in and out continuously. This is a working building, a building in use, and the people using it have the purposeful energy of people who have business to conduct and limited time in which to conduct it. You step between two columns and into the interior. The space inside is remarkable. Tall, the ceiling perhaps 15 or 20 meters above the polished stone floor. Light falls from high clear-story windows along both sides. Wide columns of morning light that illuminate the dust in the air and create the particular atmosphere of a large interior space that manages to feel both grand and occupied. The floor is marble, not the pristine white of museums, but marble in use, worn in lines by thousands of feet, marked with the residue of daily life. The basilica is loud. The sound of voices fills it from end to end, reflecting off the stone surfaces and mingling into a continuous roar of human business. Small groups are clustered throughout the space. In one group, men in togas gesture with the particular authority of legal professionals, advocates, arguing a case before a seated figure at the far end of the hall who is receiving them with judicial patience. Alongside this, entirely unconcerned with the legal proceedings happening 15 meters away, a group of merchants are examining a document together, passing it from hand to hand, one man pointing repeatedly at a specific line of text. Somewhere near the door, a young man reads a letter with the sustained concentration of someone who is reading very carefully and finding the contents troubling. You are inside a Roman court and business hall, and you are visible. You feel it immediately, the way a space changes when you enter it, and your entrance causes small adjustments in the people around you. Not alarm, not confrontation, just adjustment. The merchant who was speaking pauses for a fraction of a second. The advocate who was gesturing lets his gesture complete and does not immediately begin the next one. The young man reading his letter looks up, looks at you, and looks back down. You are being seen, and you are being found unusual. You walk slowly along the side wall, looking at the paintings. The walls of the basilica are painted in architectural panels, geometric patterns and strong colors. Here and there a painted scene. You look at them because looking at them gives you something to do with your eyes and a reason for being still in this space. And you need a reason because you realize, with a quiet internal alarm, that you have been in this building for perhaps 2 minutes, and you have already been looked at by 6 or 7 people, each of whom has registered your presence and moved on, but registered it nonetheless, filed it somewhere, the way the human brain files the things that do not quite fit. You leave the basilica. The light outside is brighter now, the shadows shorter. The morning is advancing. You are hungrier. You are more thirsty, despite the water at the fountain. The sun, which was already present when you woke, is now definitively, aggressively present. Not the friendly warmth of a mild day, but the concentrated heat of a Mediterranean summer making its intentions known. You feel it on the top of your head, on the back of your neck, on your forearms. You have no hat. You have no shade except the moving shade of walls and awnings, which you have been unconsciously seeking as you walk, pressing to the shaded side of every street. The Romans deal with this. They deal with it collectively, architecturally, socially. The awnings that stretch above the market stalls are one answer. The colonnades of certain public buildings, the basilica you just left, the portions of the forums that are lined with covered walkways, are another. The timing of Roman daily life is itself an adaptation. Important business happens in the morning. The long, slow heat of the afternoon is given over to rest and to the bathhouses, and only when the heat begins to ease in the early evening does the city return to social activity. You are encountering the morning city, and the morning city is manageable. The afternoon city, which you do not yet know is waiting for you, is a different proposition. But you are not thinking about the afternoon yet. You are thinking about the immediate present, because the immediate present has just presented you with something that requires your full attention. A child is staring at you, not an adult performing the social gesture of looking and looking away. A child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, dressed in a short tunic, barefoot, standing against the wall of a building on the other side of the street, staring at you with the absolute, unmediated frankness that children bring to the things they find genuinely puzzling. The child does not look away when you look back. He stares with an expression of profound, uncomplicated interest. Then he says something. He says it to a woman who is standing near him, his mother, probably. And though you cannot understand the words, you can hear the tone perfectly. It is the tone of a child saying, "What is that?" Or, "What is wrong with that person?" The woman glances at you. She responds to the child quietly. She is not alarmed. She is, perhaps amused, perhaps mildly dismissive, the way an adult manages a child's inconvenient curiosity about something that deserves no extended engagement. She takes the child's hand and they walk away. You stand in the street and watch them go. You feel something shifting, not in the street, which is exactly the same as it was a moment ago, but in your own understanding of your situation. Something that has been at the edge of your awareness all morning is trying to move into the center. You are not blending in. You already knew this. You have known it since you looked down at your clothing in the alley. But there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and feeling it. And what the child's unguarded stare has just given you is the feeling. You are the thing that does not fit. You are the puzzle. And puzzles, in a world without many strangers, and without the particular urban anonymity of modern cities, attract attention. You begin walking again. You turn a corner and find yourself on a street running parallel to, and then approaching, the slope of one of the hills. The buildings here are older, their facades more weathered. The plaster has fallen in larger sections, revealing the brick beneath. A building that may once have been residential has been converted at ground level into a series of storage rooms, their doors secured with iron locks of impressive size. Amphorae are stacked against the outer wall in a configuration that suggests a warehouse of some kind. The olive oil or wine or grain-based economy of this city requiring constant storage at every neighborhood scale. You are aware of a growing soreness in your feet. The road surface, which is so impressive as a feat of engineering, is made of volcanic stone, and walking on it in modern footwear is producing friction in places that modern footwear was not designed to protect. The soles off your feet are registering each step. Your legs are beginning to feel the accumulated mileage of the morning. You have been walking, with very few breaks, for what feels like 2 or 3 hours, and in that time you have consumed nothing and drunk only the small amount of water at the single fountain. You find a section of wall where the shade is wide enough to sit in. You sit. You lean your back against the wall, and you look at the street. The rhythm of it is hypnotic, and it is beautiful, in a way that you are only now beginning to perceive because the shock of the initial arrival is fading and something quieter is setting in. A man passes with a mule, the mule carrying 2 large baskets of something, grain, probably, secured with rope. The man walks beside it, one hand on the lead, his attention somewhere ahead. The mule's hooves on the stones make a sound that you associate with rural life, and which is, here, simply the sound of urban freight delivery. 2 women walk past together, talking in low voices, carrying baskets over their arms. An older man, well dressed by the standards of what you are beginning to understand, walks with a young man who is carrying a writing case. A patron and a secretary, perhaps, or a teacher and a student, heading somewhere with a purpose you cannot determine. A dog of uncertain breed trots past with the purposeful demeanor of a dog that has somewhere to be. Rome has dogs. It has many dogs. It also has cats, less visible because cats manage their own affairs and do not parade them. It has pigeons in unimaginable quantities. It has rats, which you have not yet seen, but which are as much a part of the urban ecosystem as any human resident. It has the insects that a warm city full of food and people and animals inevitably generates. The flies, right now, are finding you interesting. You brush one away from your face and think, this is not sustainable. Not as a dramatic thought, as a practical one. As the kind of assessment that a person makes when the immediate crisis has passed its first peak and the longer-term shape of the problem becomes visible. You woke, possibly, 2 or 3 hours ago. You have had water once. You have had no food. You have no way to get food. You have no allies. You do not speak the language. You do not know where you are in the city with any precision. And you cannot stay where you are. Because staying in one place, you understand instinctively, is not a neutral act here. In a modern city, a person sitting on a sidewalk can do so for a long time before anyone pays particular attention. The city accommodates stillness, benches, parks, the general social contract of urban anonymity. In Rome, in the 1st century, the social contract is different. This is a city in which everyone's social position is legible, or is supposed to be legible, in their clothing, their companions, their location, their activity. A person sitting alone against a wall with no apparent occupation, no identifiable companions, no visible purpose. That person is a puzzle. Puzzles attract attention. And not all of the attention that puzzles attract in Rome is benign. You stand up. You keep moving. You smell the Tiber before you see it. Not the clean, deep earth smell of the aqueduct water. This is a different kind of smell, organic and heavy. The smell of a major urban river in summer, carrying the effluent of a city of 1 million people along with the natural load of a lowland river running slow and warm between its clay banks. It is not an offensive smell, exactly. Nothing in Rome's smell landscape is quite clean enough for the Tiber to stand out as particularly offensive, but it is distinctive, and when the wind shifts in the way that riverside breezes do in the middle of a summer morning, you catch it suddenly and understand what it is. You orient yourself and walk toward it. The streets slope more consistently downward as you approach the water. The buildings change character. More warehouses, more storage, more of the low, functional structures that serve the logistical needs of a river port. You begin to hear the Tiber before you see it. Or rather, you begin to hear what happens along the Tiber, which is substantially louder than the river itself. Voices, the sound of cargo being shifted, the particular rhythm of work songs, men moving something heavy together and regulating their effort with sound. Then the river appears between 2 buildings, and you stop. It is wider than you may have imagined. The Tiber at Rome is not a romantic stream. It is a serious river, gray-brown in this light, moving with the confident pace of water that has a long way still to go. The banks are lined with stone quays, and the quays are busy, not frantic, but continuously, purposefully busy with the labor of supplying a city. Flat-bottomed boats are moored along the bank, some of them empty and riding high, some of them low in the water with cargo. There are men unloading amphorae. 2 men working together, one handing up and one receiving, establishing a rhythm that they will maintain for hours. There are stacked timber bales wrapped in rope. There are sacks of grain. Downstream, you can see the arches of a bridge. Upstream, the river curves and the city follows it, buildings right to the water's edge and in some cases partially over it, overhanging structures built on foundations sunk into the bank. You stand at the top of the slope that leads down to the quay and you watch. You are watching, you realize, because it is the only thing you can do. Every activity you have observed this morning has been inaccessible to you. The transactions, the conversations, the social interactions that require language and currency and identity. Watching is free. Watching costs nothing. And the Tiber, at least, does not watch you back. Or so you think. One of the men on the quay has looked up from his work. He is looking at you. He is a large man, physically very large by the standards of this world, a world in which chronic nutritional deficiencies in childhood leave most adults shorter and lighter than modern people in developed nations. He is broad across the shoulders from years of moving heavy things, and his tunic is rough, and his expression as he looks up at you is the expression of a man who manages this section of waterfront and who notices when something appears at the top of the slope that does not belong to anything he understands. You are standing there in your modern clothes at the top of the quay slope, and he is looking at you. You do not look away immediately, because looking away immediately feels like a concession of some kind, an admission of something. So you hold the look for a moment, and in that moment you study his face, and you recognize in it not hostility but something else, something more careful, a professional assessment. The assessment of a man who is responsible for things, for goods, perhaps, for workers, for the security of a section of riverfront, and who is deciding what category you belong to. You do not belong to any category, he knows. He says something. He says it without raising his voice, which means it was not said to you. It was said to someone beside him. And the person beside him also looks up. You turn and walk away. Not quickly. Not so quickly that the retreat is obvious. But you walk away with the particular care of someone who is conscious of being watched and does not want to give the watchers anything additional to think about. You walk back up into the streets, and the Tiber disappears behind the buildings, and the smell of it fades behind the smell of the city, and you keep walking because stopping has begun to feel dangerous. By now the sun has climbed to a position that tells you something definitive about time. It is mid-morning, approaching the point at which the Romans would identify as approximately the fourth or fifth hour of the day. Roman time is not our time. The Roman day is divided into 12 equal hours of daylight and 12 equal hours of darkness, which means that a day hour in summer is significantly longer than in winter and significantly longer than a modern hour. The sun's position, by any standard of calculation, tells you that you have been in this city for roughly 3 to 4 modern hours. In those hours, you have had approximately a handful of water. Nothing else. The hunger has passed from the sharp craving stage into something quieter and more insidious. Your body has begun the internal calculation that it performs when food does not arrive. A small conservation, a slight dimming of the edge on everything. The beginning of the long process by which the body begins to turn its attention inward and make adjustments. You are not in any immediate danger from hunger. The human body does not fail from a few hours without food. But the absence of food is changing how you perceive the world around you. Colors seem slightly less vivid. The sounds of the street are a little more overwhelming. The capacity for clear decision-making, which depends on glucose in ways that are not purely subjective, is slightly but definitely impaired. You are also, behind everything, frightened. You have been managing this fear since you opened your eyes in the alley, keeping it in its compartment, using the busyness of walking and watching as a way to prevent it from expanding into the space it is trying to occupy. You are frightened because you understand, at the level where clear understanding happens regardless of what the conscious mind is trying to organize, that you are in real trouble. That trouble of this particular kind, no resources, no language, no identity, no allies, in a complex and highly organized society, does not simply resolve itself through patience. You round a corner and walk into the edge of a public bath. Not inside it. The entrance to the public bath is set back slightly from the street, accessed through an archway that opens into a small courtyard. But you can smell it from here, the smell of heated water, of the specific stone and steam atmosphere that is the signature of the Roman thermi. And you can hear it, the voice echo that comes from enclosed spaces full of people, and through the archway you can see the beginning of the entrance hall and the people moving through it. The baths. You have been thinking about the baths periodically throughout the morning, and each time you have thought about them you have reached the same conclusion. They are relevant to your situation in complex and contradictory ways. On one hand, the public baths of Rome are genuinely public in a way that modern public facilities rarely are. The admission fee is minimal, so minimal that even the poorest free residents of the city can usually afford to use them. The baths are social spaces, places where the rigid hierarchies of Roman public life are slightly softened by the universal conditions of nakedness and warm water. Men of different classes bathe in the same pools. On the other hand, the baths require you to remove your clothing. And the moment your clothing comes off, you lose the only visual marker that currently distinguishes you from a slave. A slave in Rome has no legal identity, no rights, no protection beyond the property interest of their owner. A person who cannot speak Latin, who has no way to demonstrate free status, whose clothing in the changing room would be immediately identifiable as the strangest garment anyone in that room has ever seen. That person without clothing, is a man of unknown origin with no papers and no sponsor. In the social logic of Rome, the assumption about such a person is not favorable. You do not go into the baths. You stand at the entrance to the courtyard for a moment, looking in, and then you walk on. The streets are getting busier now, not quieter. This surprises you. You would have expected, after the initial morning rush, some lessening of activity. But the second rush is building. The hour when the business of the morning reaches its peak and the streets fill again with the people who have completed one set of tasks and are moving toward the next. You are walking through what you are beginning to recognize, from the scale of the buildings, from the increasing formality of the people you see, as a neighborhood adjacent to something important. The buildings here are larger and better maintained. The plaster is fresher. The people passing are wearing better clothing, and a significant number of them are wearing togas, the formal drape garment that marks Roman citizenship and serious public business. These are men going about the business of being important, or at least of performing importance, because in Rome, as in many complex societies, the performance of importance is itself a form of importance. And then you see the edge of the forum, not the forum Romanum. Or perhaps it is. You cannot entirely tell, because what you are seeing is not the Hollywood version of the forum with its clean columns rising against a blue sky. You are seeing it from ground level, from street level, through an opening between two buildings, and what you are seeing is crowded and complex and much more human than any photograph of reconstructed ancient Rome has ever quite conveyed. You move toward the opening. You pass through it. The Forum Romanum, if this is what it is perhaps 250 meters long. At this distance and scale, in this light, with this many people in it, it does not read as a monument. It reads as a very busy public space. The ground is paved in marble and travertine. Colonnades run along the long sides. At one end, the steps of a temple rise above the general level. At the other end, the great golden milestone, the Miliarium Aureum, from which all distances in the empire are theoretically measured. But these details are background. The foreground is people. There are hundreds of people in this space. They are moving, standing, gesturing, arguing, negotiating, embracing, avoiding. Men in togas moving with the deliberate self-consciousness of men in public. Men in tunics moving faster, with the efficiency of men who have work to do. Slaves following their owners. Scribes writing. Lawyers rehearsing. Merchants looking for buyers. Politicians looking for voters. Priests moving toward the temples. People who appear to be simply here. The way that public spaces attract the people who don't have enough private space and need somewhere to be that is not their apartment. And there are the monuments. They are real. The columns. The temples. The rostra. The platform where orators speak, its front decorated with the bronze rams of captured ships. The arches. The statues. So many statues that the space between the columns has been filled with them. Generations of honorees frozen in marble and bronze. Watching the living city go about its business. You walk into the forum, and immediately, within 30 seconds of entering this space, you feel something different. In the neighborhood streets, you were invisible enough. There was always something happening, always somewhere for attention to go. The streets are full and people are occupied. But the forum is different. The forum is a space of performance, a space designed to be looked across, a space in which the act of appearing is itself meaningful. In this space, you are more visible. In this space, the people who are here partly because they are watching things are more attentive. Within 40 seconds, you have been looked at by 3 people with the particular gaze that means, I am not certain what I am looking at, and I am going to think about it. You move slowly through the space, looking at the columns, looking at the temples, trying to perform the behavior of a person who belongs here, which is itself a sign that you do not, because people who belong places do not perform it. Near the rostra, there is a group of men, 5 of them, arranged in the loose configuration of men who know each other and are together, but not in formal meeting. They are discussing something, the quick, overlapping conversation of political argument, voices rising and cutting across each other. They are well dressed. One of them is wearing a toga of particular quality, its folds arranged with the careful precision of a man whose household includes someone whose job it is to arrange togas with careful precision. They are the kind of men who are here because the forum is where they are expected to be, because their social position requires them to be seen here, to conduct the informal conversations that constitute much of Roman political life. You pass within perhaps 10 meters of them, moving slowly, looking at the base of a column as though it interests you. One of them stops talking mid-sentence. You feel it before you confirm it. The subtle change in the acoustic texture of a conversation when one participant disengages. You glance sideways without turning your head, and the man who has stopped talking is looking at you. Not casually, with the specific attention of a man who has just noticed something that doesn't fit and is allocating processing power to figuring out why. You keep walking. You do not look back. But you heard the conversation resume, and you heard, though you could not understand, the brief exchange that followed your passage. One voice asking something, another answering with what sounds like a deflection, a not my problem tone. And then the subject apparently changing, the conversation flowing back to whatever it was before. It is nothing. It is barely anything. It is the kind of moment that happens 100 times a day in a city and that leaves no trace on any of the participants. Except that it is not nothing to you. To you it is data. Another data point in a pattern that is accumulating all morning. A pattern of glances and pauses and small adjustments in the behavior of the people around you that, individually, mean very little, but collectively are beginning to mean something. You are being noticed. You are not being ignored. And in the specific social geography of the Roman Forum, not being ignored is different from being ignored in the way that a pebble in a shoe is different from a stone. The discomfort is not dramatic, but it is progressive, and it is getting worse. You leave the forum through a different opening than you entered, moving with the flow of the crowd, letting other people's movement carry you out of the space and back into the streets. The streets here, adjacent to the forum, are broader than the ones you woke in. They are designed to accommodate the traffic that the civic center generates. The senators walking to the curia, the lawyers walking to the basilicas, the supplicants making their way to whatever magistrate they need to petition today, the vendors who have set up along these routes because the foot traffic is reliable and the customers, on average, have money. You are walking downhill, following the gentle slope of the valley floor, and you realize, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been thinking hard under physical stress for several hours, that you have no plan. This is not a revelation. You have known since you woke that you have no plan. But for most of the morning, the experience of the city itself has been sufficiently overwhelming to occupy the part of your mind that would otherwise be generating plans. The sensory load of Rome, the sounds, the smells, the visual complexity, the heat, the people, has been functioning as a kind of anesthetic against the deeper problem. Now, walking downhill through a somewhat quieter street, with the anesthetic wearing off, the deeper problem presents itself with new clarity. What do you actually do? The question has several layers, and they reveal themselves one at a time like problems arranged in sequence, each one becoming visible only once you have cleared the one in front of it. The first layer is physical: water, food, shade. These are manageable over the short term. You have found water once and can find it again. The public fountains are everywhere. But food requires money or social connection, and you have neither, and the timeline on that problem is measured in days, not hours. The second layer is social: communication, identity, position. Without Latin, you cannot communicate with anyone in a way that goes beyond gesture. Without the ability to communicate, you cannot establish even the most basic social identity, cannot explain yourself, cannot ask for help, cannot negotiate for anything. The entire apparatus of Roman social life, which operates through formal and informal networks of obligation and exchange, is inaccessible to you in a structural way that goes deeper than mere foreignness. A foreigner with money and a letter of introduction can navigate Rome. A foreigner with skills, with some phrase of Latin, with some commodity to offer, that person has leverage. You have no leverage of any kind. The third layer is the one you have been pushing away, and it now insists on your attention. You do not legally exist. This is not a metaphorical statement. In Rome, legal existence, the condition of being a person in a juridical sense, a person with rights and protections and a defined place in the social order, is not a given. It is a status, and it is assigned by the state through specific mechanisms. Roman citizens are registered. Their births are recorded in the tabulae publici, the public records. Freedmen carry documentation of their manumission. Slaves are registered as the property of their owners. Foreign residents with legal standing in the city have documentation, letters, formal relationships with patrons, or with the state itself that establish who they are and why they are here. Everyone, in other words, has papers, or has an owner who has papers, or has a patron who vouches for them, or has a community, a collegium, a guild, a group of foreigners from the same province who have established a recognized collective presence in the city. You have none of these things. In a modern city with its bureaucratic mass and anonymous scale, a person can exist in the gaps of documentation for a long time. The city is simply too large, too complex, too impersonal to systematically locate the people who don't fit its records. But Rome, despite its size, despite its apparent chaos, is a city with neighborhood-level administrative structures that are specifically designed to know who is in the city and what they are doing here. The vici, the neighborhood units, are managed by elected officials, the vicomagistri, who know their neighborhoods in the intimate, granular way of people who live there and whose social position depends on knowing them. These men know who belongs in which building, who has recently arrived, who is visiting whom, and for how long. They are not police, exactly, but they are the people who talk to police. They are the connective tissue between the neighborhood and the city's administrative apparatus, and their knowledge of their neighborhoods is the Roman state's first line of information about what is happening in the city at ground level. The vigiles, the combined night watch and fire brigade, are the other layer. They patrol the streets. They know the faces and the habits of the people in their zones. They are looking, primarily, for fire hazards and for the kind of nocturnal disorder that Roman cities share with all cities. But they are also looking for the unusual. They are looking for the things that don't fit. You fit less with every passing hour. You find another fountain. This one is larger than the first, a long stone trough of the kind used to water animals, fed by a single pipe, running continuously. There are people using it. A man watering 2 horses, a woman filling a large clay amphora using a ladle. You wait until there is a gap and drink again, more carefully this time, less quickly, and the water is cold again, and it helps the way water always helps and doesn't help the way food would help. You sit on the edge of the trough after you drink. The stone is warm. The horses are patient and smell of horse. The smell, surprisingly, is not unpleasant. A familiar, mammalian smell in a street that offers far less familiar things. You look at your hands. Modern fingernails, with their unconsciously tended, vaguely uniform appearance. Modern palms, with calluses in places that reflect modern activity and not the manual labor that would produce a Roman workman's hands. You look at your wrists, at the watch, if you are wearing one, that no one in this city would understand the purpose of. You look at your shoes. You look at your shoes and you think about your shoes for a moment, because your shoes might be the single most conspicuous thing about you. Roman footwear, at this period, consists primarily of sandals. The calceus for outdoor street wear, in various grades of quality and complexity, and the solia, a simpler sandal for informal use. Both are made of leather, with soles constructed from stacked layers of leather or sometimes wood, with straps that wrap and tie around the foot and ankle in patterns that, like everything in Rome, communicate information about the wearer's status. Military sandals are different again, heavier, with hobnails in the soles for grip and durability, and the distinctive mark of the soldier wherever they walk. What you are wearing on your feet is none of these things. Whatever your shoes are, modern athletic shoes, modern boots, modern dress shoes, modern sandals in a contemporary style, they are made with manufacturing processes, materials, and aesthetic principles that have not yet been conceived. They are wrong in a precise, technical way that anyone who looks at them would register as wrong without necessarily being able to articulate why. They are the shoes of someone who does not come from anywhere that anyone in this city knows about. And people look at shoes. This is not a paranoid observation. It is a social reality. Shoes, in Rome, are extremely legible status markers, and the Roman habit of reading people through clothing includes reading them from the ground up. A man with shoes like yours registers immediately, at a subconscious level, as something without a category. The man who has finished watering his horses is looking at your feet. He is not making it dramatic. He is not staring. He looks. His gaze travels from your feet to your face, and then he leads his horses away. But the look happened, and you registered it. And the accumulating total of such looks is now a number that your body is tracking even when your conscious mind is trying to focus on other things. You stand up from the trough. You move away from the fountain. The sun has moved. You cannot tell time with any precision, but the sun's position and the quality of the light tell you that the morning is well advanced, that what the Romans would call the fifth or sixth hour has arrived, which places the time somewhere in the range of what a modern clock would read as late morning. The shadows, which were long when you woke and have been shortening steadily, are now approaching the brief, compressed minimums of approaching noon. The heat is significant now, not the relative warmth of early morning, but a serious, pressing heat that occupies the space between the buildings and accumulates in the narrow streets and pushes downward from the unshaded sections of the road with a physical authority. You are sweating. You have been sweating for an hour, steadily, and the perspiration is drawing salt out of your body that the water you have drunk is not replacing, and the combined effect of heat and dehydration and hunger is a subtle cognitive dimming, the edges of your perception losing some of their sharpness, the world around you acquiring the slightly unreal quality of an environment experienced through glass. You find shade. A colonnade running along the front of a large building, a public building of some kind, its function not immediately obvious, but its structure offering a covered walkway perhaps 3 meters wide, paved in cool stone, open to the street through a series of round arches. Other people are here for the same reason. 2 old men on a bench, a woman nursing an infant, 3 men talking in low voices, using the colonnade as a business venue, a portable office in a city with a shortage of private space. You stop in the shade. You lean against a column. The stone is cool against your back through your clothing, and you close your eyes for a moment, and the sounds of the street reach you without the visual information, and for a few seconds Rome is simply sound. A remarkable, layered, continuous human sound, ancient and immediate, and surrounding you completely. When you open your eyes, one of the 3 men who were talking has turned to look at you. He is middle-aged, perhaps 45 years old, with the kind of face that has spent decades in the sun and reflects every one of those decades. His tunic is better quality than average, not a wealthy man's garment, but the garment of a man who is comfortable and who manages his appearance with some care. He looks at you with the specific attention of a man who has had time, in this shaded colonnade, to do what idle men do: observe. He has been in this colonnade for some time, apparently. He has watched you arrive. He has looked at you the way that people with time and nothing pressing look at interesting things. He says something. He says it at a moderate conversational volume, directed at you. You don't understand it. You look at him. You make a gesture, a small, apologetic gesture with your hands, the universal body language of "I don't understand," which is a genuinely universal human signal that transcends language. He pauses. He says something else, differently, not louder, but slower, with the slight over-articulation of someone trying to communicate across a language gap. This is a man who has, probably, encountered foreigners before. Rome is full of foreigners. Merchants from the eastern provinces, speaking Greek rather than Latin. Slaves from every corner of the empire. Soldiers from Gaul and Britain and Pannonia who have retired and settled in the city. The concept of the person who doesn't speak Latin is not exotic in Rome. It is common. But the foreigners who don't speak Latin generally speak something else that places them: Greek, Aramaic, a Germanic language, an African language. The foreigners not Latin tells you something about where the foreigner is from, and knowing where the foreigner is from tells you something about their probable status and purpose and whether they warrant concern. You don't speak anything he recognizes. Your response to his question, whatever you say, whether you speak English or French or Japanese or any modern language, it sounds in no pattern he has ever heard. Not the melodic Greek that educated Romans speak with varying degrees of fluency. Not the guttural Germanic sounds he might associate with the northern frontier. Not the particular cadences of the eastern languages that carry the silk trade and the spice trade into Rome from the ports. Something else entirely. Something that has no origin in any geography he can name. He looks at you with an expression that has shifted from the mild interest of idle observation to something more engaged. He says something to his companions, without looking away from you. They respond. He responds to their response, still watching you. The conversation between the 3 of them is brief and quiet, and has you as its subject, and you stand against your column and wait for it to resolve. Then the man looks away. He returns to his companions, and the 3 of them resume their previous conversation, apparently finished with you as a topic. You let out a breath you were not aware of holding. But as you straighten from the column and prepare to move back into the street, you notice that one of the other two men, the youngest of the three, perhaps 30 years old, with the alert, watchful eyes of someone who makes his living by noticing things, has not returned to the conversation. He is still looking at you. His gaze is not hostile. It is not friendly. It is the focused, non-committal attention of a professional assessment, and it stays on you as you step out of the shade and back into the light. You don't look back, but you know he is still watching. You know it the way you know when someone is watching you from behind, that primitive, pre-rational sense of observed presence. You know it until you have turned a corner and the colonnade is behind you and out of sight, and you don't know it anymore. And what takes its place in your chest is something that is not quite fear and not quite relief and not quite either. You are now in a part of the city that feels less familiar than the areas you have been walking through. The streets here are slightly steeper. The buildings feel older. The color of the stone is different, darker, less the warm terracotta of the residential districts, and more the gray-brown of a hill that has been built on and rebuilt on for so long that the geology and the architecture have become difficult to separate. There is a smell of animals here that is stronger and more specific than the general animal smell of the city. You follow it around a corner and find yourself at the edge of what you understand immediately to be a livestock area. Not a farm, not a rural space, but a section of the city where animals are brought, sold, and probably slaughtered. There are cattle here, and sheep, in pens constructed from wooden rails. There are men moving among them with the efficient, practiced movements of people who have worked with animals their entire lives. There is the sound of animals, which is its own complex texture. Cattle low, sheep produce their endless, slightly panicked bleating, and over it all, the voices of the men transacting the business of livestock in the middle of a city. The ground here has a different character. The volcanic stone of the road is still present but partially obscured by a layer of straw and the material that accumulates wherever large animals are confined. The flies are more intense here. The heat has trapped the smell into a concentration that makes breathing a slightly more deliberate act than usual. You skirt the edge of the livestock area without going into it, because the men working there have already seen you. And you have learned this morning that men whose attention is not occupied by something pressing will allocate that attention to things that don't fit, and you don't fit, and you don't want their attention. But in skirting the livestock area, you walk along a wall, and as you walk along that wall, you pass a man who is sitting on the ground with his back against it. He is, at first glance, in a similar position to yours, sitting against a wall, alone, in the shade, not obviously doing anything. But as you pass him, you see the differences. His tunic is torn at the shoulder. His feet are bare, and the soles of them are blackened with street dirt in the way that comes from many days of going unshod. His face is the face of a man who has been hungry for longer than today. He is looking at the ground in front of him, and he does not look up when you pass. He is, you understand, at the bottom of a hierarchy that you are currently unable to identify your own position in. He is what Rome does to people who fall out of its networks of belonging, who lose their patron, their household, their place in a collegium, their connection to any of the structures that support individual survival in the city. He is not a slave, because a slave has an owner and an owner's interest in their welfare. He is not quite a free man with functioning civic identity. He is in the gap, and you are aware, looking at him, that you are also in the gap, just a fresher arrival in it, and more conspicuously out of place. The man on the ground, for all his evident difficulty, wears clothing that makes sense. He speaks Latin, or something Latin adjacent. He is legible to the city even in his degraded position. There are social institutions that exist for him, the distributions of grain, the charity of temples, the informal economy of casual labor that Rome always needs. He is at the bottom, but he is at the bottom of a structure he belongs to. You are not at the bottom of any structure you can identify. This thought sits in you with a specific, uncomfortable weight as you continue walking. You are approaching something. You can tell by the change in the street. It widens again, and the buildings along it take on a more monumental character. And the people moving through it are increasing in number and moving with the particular directional coherence of people going toward the same place. You follow them. What opens before you is not a forum, and not a market, and not a basilica. It is a set of large public baths, a thermae of significant scale, its entrance marked by columns and a broad flight of stairs, the structure behind it extending back a considerable distance, the building itself implying an interior of remarkable complexity. This is one of Rome's great public bath complexes, not the largest in the city, but large by any other standard, a building that contains not only the bathing rooms themselves, but exercise yards, libraries, gardens, meeting spaces. A city within the city. You stand at the edge of the broad space before it and watch the people going in. All kinds of people, men of evident means and men of evident poverty, young and old. People who are clearly here because they have nowhere else to be, and people who are clearly here because bathing at midday is a scheduled part of their organized life. The baths are the one place in Rome where the social architecture loosens slightly, where the rigid hierarchies of the street become temporarily less absolute. They are also, as you have already decided, not a place you can safely go, but you watch them for a moment, because what they represent is important. The thermi represent what Rome provides. This is the deal Rome offers its residents. In exchange for your complete subordination to the social, legal, and political structures of the Roman state, the state provides you with water, with roads, with these extraordinary public facilities, with grain distributions if you are a citizen without means, with entertainment, with the administrative infrastructure of the most sophisticated civilization the Western world has yet produced. The deal is remarkable, and it is entirely conditional on belonging. Belonging is not optional in Rome. It is not a lifestyle choice. It is a survival requirement. To be in Rome without belonging, without citizenship or documented residency or a recognized social identity, is not simply uncomfortable. It is, over any extended timeline, untenable. You are beginning to understand this in your body rather than just your mind. The morning has taught it slowly, through 100 small demonstrations. Every transaction requires belonging. Every social interaction presupposes it. Every look from a stranger that lingers slightly too long is a reminder that the city is looking for you to fit somewhere, and finding that you don't, and finding a way for future reference. The city is remembering you. You find a section of wall near a public fountain in a small square, and you sit against it. Not because you have decided to stop, but because your legs have made the decision for you. The hunger is now a constant presence, not painful exactly, but insistent, a low-level biological lobbying effort that your body is conducting against your intentions. The heat is at its peak, the sun directly overhead, the shadows minimized to thin strips at the bases of walls. The air in the square is still, no breeze reaches this enclosed space, and the temperature within it has been climbing all morning towards something that a person in reasonable health could manage, but that a dehydrated, unfed, exhausted person begins to find genuinely oppressive. You drink from the fountain again. You count the times you have drunk today. 3. That is all you have had. It is not enough. You know it is not enough. You drink more deeply this time, until you have drunk as much as you can, until the cold water sits heavily in your empty stomach, and the thought of more is briefly nauseating. You go back to the wall and sit. From here you can see the square in its entirety. You have been looking at Rome all morning in a condition of continuous motion, and there is something different about seeing it while still. The square has its own ecology, its own regular patterns of presence and movement. A man who sells cooked chickpeas from a portable brazier has been in the same corner of the square since at least the time you arrived here. He has customers at intervals, not constantly, but regularly, a rhythm he presumably knows well enough to predict. A group of children are playing some kind of game at the far end, using chalk marks on the stone to define a territory that their game requires. 2 women are talking near the shrine. This square also has a shrine, a different painted niche, different terracotta figures, same darkened wall below it. A cart has been parked near the narrow entrance to a side street, its driver apparently gone inside somewhere, the single mule attached to it standing in the particular motionless patience of mules waiting for something. You watch all of this, and as you watch it, you become aware of something that has been building since the colonnade, something that you have been registering at the edge of consciousness and have been reluctant to bring into focus. You are being watched, not by everyone, not even by most people in this square, but there is a man at the far corner, not the chickpea vendor, someone different, a man doing nothing obvious, standing rather than sitting, in a position that happens to have a clear line of sight to where you are sitting, who has been in that position for longer than makes sense if his presence there is accidental. He is not staring at you. He is doing what trained observers do, looking at other things, spending time in his field of vision across a range of objects, returning to the point of interest with the casual rhythm of a scan rather than the locked concentration of a stare. But he keeps returning to you. You have been sitting here for perhaps 10 minutes. This man was already in his corner when you arrived. He is still there. His body language has not changed. He has not spoken to anyone. He has not bought anything from the chickpea vendor. He has not gone anywhere. He is waiting. You are not certain of this. You are not certain of anything in this city. You have been wrong about things all morning, misreading gestures, misinterpreting glances, discovering that what looked like suspicion was simply curiosity and what looked like casualness concealed assessment. You might be wrong about this man. The hours of stress and hunger and disorientation might be generating a pattern in random data where no pattern exists. But you find, sitting against the wall with the noon heat pressing down on this enclosed square, that you cannot entirely convince yourself of this. You stand. You move toward the exit of the square, a different one from the one you entered through, because there is a different one and you choose it deliberately, in the way that people choose exits when they want to reduce predictability. You do not look back at the corner as you leave. You don't need to. The awareness of his position in the square is precise enough in your memory that you can calculate, from your knowledge of where he was standing and the angle of his orientation, whether he would have a clear line of sight to the exit you are using. He would. The streets narrow again as you move away from the square. This is deeper residential Rome, the kind of area where the streets between buildings are barely wide enough for two people to pass comfortably and where the sounds of human life reach you from every direction, muffled through walls but present. An argument above you, a baby crying, the rhythmic thud of something being beaten, wool, probably, laundry, something domestic. The smell of cooking reaches you from an unseen window. Someone is making something with onions and oil and something else, something herbed, and the smell is so powerfully suggestive of a meal that your body responds to it before your mind processes it. A sudden sharp salivation, a contraction in your stomach that is almost painful. You stop walking. You are standing in the middle of a narrow street, alone for the moment. The street is empty except for you and, at the far end, the back of someone moving away. You are standing still in a narrow Roman street at approximately noon, with no food and no money and no Latin and no plan and a growing suspicion that you are being watched. And you are standing here because the smell of someone else's lunch has temporarily overridden your capacity for forward motion. This is the moment when certain things become clear. You have been in Rome for perhaps 5 or 6 hours. In that time, you have managed the most immediate physical crises. You have water. You are not at the stage of physiological collapse from heat, but you have solved nothing. You have acquired no food. You have made no contact with any person that constitutes a useful social interaction. You have established no foothold of any kind in the social structure of this city. And the city, meanwhile, has been learning you. Every glance, every paused conversation, every slightly too long look from a stranger represents a small amount of information entering the social fabric of the neighborhood, the invisible, distributed record that a community maintains about the things that happen within it. This information does not disappear. It circulates in the conversation of people who know each other through the networks of neighborhood social life that are the true infrastructure of the Roman city. The man at the quay who noted you and said something to his companion. The woman who watched you drink at the first fountain. The legal professionals in the basilica who adjusted their conversation slightly as you passed. The man in the colonnade who conducted a brief conversation about you with his associates. The watcher in the corner of the square. Each of these encounters has left a trace. Not a formal trace, not a record in any document, not yet. But a human trace, the kind of trace that moves through conversation and accumulates in the memory of communities, and that eventually, when enough traces align, becomes something more formal. Someone in this city knows that there is a person walking its streets who cannot be explained. And in a city whose administrative structure is specifically designed to account for every person within its boundaries, to know who they are, where they sleep, who is responsible for them. An inexplicable person is not simply an interesting curiosity. An inexplicable person is a problem. And Rome knows how to deal with problems. You start walking again. You move through the narrow street and emerge onto a slightly wider one, and you orient yourself by the sun, still roughly overhead, moving toward the afternoon arc, and you walk in a direction that seems to take you toward what you estimate is the center of the city, though in Rome's complex topography this calculation is more difficult than it sounds. You are thinking, as clearly as your current physical state allows, about options. The options present themselves in a hierarchy of difficulty. The easiest option, the one that costs nothing and requires no resources, is simply to keep moving. Keep walking. Maintain the appearance of someone with a destination even if the destination does not exist. This strategy has served you through the morning, but it is not a sustainable strategy. It is a deferral, not a solution, and with each passing hour the conditions that make it viable erode slightly. You are getting more tired. You are more dehydrated, more hungry. Your ability to perform purposeful movement will diminish over the afternoon as the heat intensifies and the physical depletion continues. The second option is communication. Some attempt to make contact with someone in a way that generates help rather than suspicion. This option crashes immediately on the language barrier. Without Latin, you cannot communicate anything complex. You cannot explain your situation. You cannot ask for assistance in any form that would make sense to the person you are asking. You could try gestures. Mime is a real communicative tool across language barriers, and Romans are not strangers to gestural communication, given the range of languages present in their city. But the specific information you need to convey, the situation you need to explain, is so far outside the frame of any situation a first-century Roman would recognize that the miming would be either incomprehensible or, worse, would generate precisely the wrong interpretation. The third option, which presents itself now with a clarity you have been avoiding, is to find some authority and present yourself to it. The logic of this is the logic of surrender. If you are going to be identified eventually regardless, it is better to present yourself on your own terms than to be found. But this logic collides immediately with the reality of what presenting yourself to Roman authority means when you cannot speak Latin, cannot explain your origin, and are wearing clothing that places you outside every category of person that Roman authority recognizes. Roman authority, the vigiles, the aediles who manage public order, the urban cohorts, deals with inexplicable persons in ways that are determined by Roman law. Roman law's categories for inexplicable persons are limited. A free person who cannot demonstrate free status is not, by default, treated as a free person. The burden of proof is on the person, not the state. You cannot produce proof. You cannot even produce a coherent claim to examine. The option of authority evaporates. What remains is simply, keep moving, and see what the afternoon brings. You turn a corner and stop. The street ahead of you opens into a broader space. And in this space, there is something happening that is different from anything you have seen this morning. A crowd, not the diffuse, directional movement of morning street traffic, but an actual gathering. A collection of people oriented toward a common point, standing still or moving slowly, their attention focused on something in the center of the space. You approach carefully, moving to the outer edge of the crowd. In the center, a man is speaking. He is standing on a wooden box or some slight elevation, and he is addressing the people around him with the rhetorical energy of a man who speaks in public regularly and enjoys it. He is not, as far as you can tell from the content of the crowd's reaction, small laughs at intervals, murmurs of response, the steady attentive quality of people who are listening rather than merely present. He is not speaking about anything political or dangerously seditious. He might be a street philosopher, one of the cynic or stoic popularizers who were a genuine feature of Roman public life, delivering a dose of accessible moral philosophy to anyone who cared to stop. He might be an entertainer. He might be a man with something to sell, beginning with a speech and ending with an offer. Whatever he is, the crowd has its attention on him, and that means the crowd's attention is not, for this moment, on you. You stand at the outer edge and breathe. You let the pressure of the morning ease slightly. The speaker's voice is well-trained. Even without understanding the words, you can hear the craft in it, the pacing, the modulations, the way he lifts his hands at certain moments and lets his voice drop at others. He is performing, but performing with genuine skill, and the crowd around you is genuinely engaged, and you are standing inside this small pocket of communal attention, and you are, for this moment, invisible. A woman standing near you at the outer edge of the crowd has a child on her hip. The child is perhaps 2 years old, the age at which children are simultaneously everywhere and uncontrollable. And this child is doing what small children do in crowds, looking not at the speaker, but at the other people, cataloging faces with the intense empirical curiosity of a being for whom everything is still new. The child's gaze travels around the circle of the crowd and arrives at you. The child stares at you with the same unfiltered attention as the child in the street earlier. Then the child does something different. The child reaches out one hand toward you, in the manner of small children who encounter novel things and want to touch them to complete their assessment. You look at the child. You look at the mother, who has now noticed where her child's attention is directed, and who is now looking at you, at your face, your clothing, with the same assessment you have been receiving all morning, but in her case with an additional layer of maternal evaluation, the particular parsing of a mother deciding whether the thing her child is interested in is safe. She says something quiet to the child. She does not move the child away. She does not make a concerned gesture or stiffen with alarm. She simply says something, the way you say something to a small child when the small child has focused on something that is interesting but requires no action, and the child looks at you for another moment. And then the speaker says something that produces a laugh, and the crowd's energy shifts, and the child's attention is captured by the sound and moves away from you. You look at the mother. She meets your eyes for a moment. Her expression is complicated, not hostile, not welcoming, somewhere in the uncertain territory between neutrality and mild concern. Then she looks back at the speaker. You realize you are holding your hands carefully, consciously, in front of you in a posture of deliberate non-threat. You have been doing this, you think, for the past hour without noticing. The physical management of how you appear to others, the constant low-level work of trying to look unthreatening, purposeful, normal, is exhausting in a way that goes deeper than muscles. It is cognitively exhausting. It requires continuous attention to be applied to a task that, in a world where you belong somewhere, would require no attention at all. The speaker finishes his speech to a small round of appreciation. The crowd begins to disperse with the particular energy of a dispersing crowd. Inward turning, the transition from collective to individual, people finding their companions, resuming interrupted conversations, moving back into the stream of the city. And as the crowd disperses, you are exposed again, standing in the middle of the space, without the cover of the crowd's attention, in the clear noon light. You see them first as shapes in the dispersing crowd, 3 of them, moving differently from the people around them, with the specific directional intention of people who are going somewhere rather than drifting. They are moving toward the space the crowd is vacating, coming from the direction of the broader street to the east, and as they come closer you begin to read details. They are not soldiers. The urban military presence in Rome is real, but not uniform. The vigiles wear a kind of uniform. The Praetorian Guard is conspicuous, but these men are not in anything recognizable as official dress. They are civilians. Working men, probably. Their tunics are plain, their arms are bare, their hands are the hands of men who use them. They are not young, but they are not old. They have the physical confidence of men accustomed to physical situations. One of them is the man from the colonnade, the youngest of the 3 men who were talking in the shade, the one with the watchful eyes who did not resume the conversation after you left, who kept looking at you as you walked back into the street. You recognize him with a cold clarity that produces no thought for a moment, just recognition. The 3 men are moving into the space. They are moving toward the place where you are standing. They have not made eye contact yet. Or perhaps they have, and you simply haven't caught it. Either way, their movement has a quality, not of pursuit, not quite, but of convergence. Of 3 separate people arriving at the same point at the same time with a degree of coordination that casual coincidence doesn't produce. The space around you has cleared now. The crowd has dispersed into the surrounding streets. The street speaker is packing up his box. The broad space is occupied now by a relatively small number of people, most of them moving through it rather than stopping in it. And in the middle of this clearing you are standing, and from the east, 3 men are crossing it toward you. The sun is overhead. The shadows are as small as they will be all day. The heat is at its greatest intensity. Rome is at the peak of its midday energy, and somewhere in the vast, complex, organized machine of this city, something has been set in motion. You look at the 3 men. And now, Now one of them makes eye contact. The one from the colonnade. He meets your gaze with the steady, non-hostile, completely serious attention of a man who has decided something and is now following through on his decision. He does not look away. You understand, in this moment, with a comprehension that bypasses reasoning and goes directly into the body, several things simultaneously. You understand that the city has been taking note of you all morning, that the disconnected glances and pauses and brief conversations about you have been, somehow, connecting, passed along the invisible networks of neighborhood information, reaching someone, somewhere, who decided that the person who does not fit, the person whose clothing makes no sense and whose language makes no sense, and who has been seen in multiple neighborhoods without apparent purpose or destination, warrants closer attention. You understand that Rome has an answer for people who cannot be explained, that the answer is not comfortable, that the answer begins with exactly this: men approaching across an open space with purpose, and continues through processes that the Roman state has developed and refined over centuries for dealing with the people who exist outside its categories. You understand, with the full weight of everything the morning has taught you, that the hunger and the thirst and the heat and the loneliness and the language barrier and the exhaustion were never the central problem. They were symptoms. The central problem has always been this: you are in a society that organizes itself around the complete legibility of every person within it. And you are completely, absolutely, irrevocably illegible. And the society has noticed. The three men are 20 meters away. Their pace has not quickened. They do not need to hurry. There is nowhere obvious for you to go. The streets are Rome's streets, and Rome is Rome's city, and you are a person standing in the middle of it with no map and no language and no answer to the question they are about to ask you. They are 15 meters away. One of them says something to the other two. The other two respond briefly, without looking away from you. 10 meters. The sun is overhead. The shadows are small. The city moves around you in its ancient, continuous rhythm. Carts and voices, and the smell of a million lives conducted in close proximity. And you are standing in the middle of it, in the middle of Rome, in the middle of the first century of the Common Era, and the greatest city in the world has finally, fully, turned its attention toward you. The man from the colonnade stops, 2 meters away. He looks at you. He says something, a single question, from the sound of it, from the inflection. Brief, direct. The question a person asks when they want a simple, verifiable answer. Who are you? Or, where do you belong? Or, what are you doing here? You do not know which. You do not know what his words mean. You do not have an answer that would survive this moment, even if you could deliver it in perfect Latin. Because the truth, the only truth you have, is that you woke in an alley in a city that does not know you exist, wearing clothes that do not belong to this world, speaking a language that will not be born for 1,000 years, with no name that anyone here would recognize and no place that anyone here could verify and no story that anyone in this extraordinary, ancient, living, breathing, watching city would believe. The three men stand before you in the noon heat of Rome. And the real survival, the survival that hunger and thirst and heat were only preparing you for, is about to begin. The man from the colonnade is waiting for an answer. He is not threatening you. That is the first thing you need to understand about this moment, and it is the thing that makes it harder rather than easier. If he were threatening you, if his hands were raised, if his posture was aggressive, if the men beside him had the coiled energy of violence about to happen, you would know what you were dealing with. You have frameworks for threat. You have instincts, however inadequate, for physical danger. But he is not threatening you. He is asking you a question. He is asking it with the reasonable patience of a man who expects a reasonable answer, who has encountered foreigners before and who understands that foreigners sometimes need a moment to process the language, and who is prepared to wait for a moment. He is a private citizen of Rome going about his day, and something about you has been sufficiently wrong for sufficiently long that he has made the decision, in consultation with two others, because Romans almost never act alone in matters like this, because the social weight of a collective decision is different from the social weight of an individual impulse, to come and ask the question that the morning has been building toward. He asks it again, the same words, slightly slower. You open your mouth, and then you close it. What comes out of you, when sound finally comes, is your own language, English or French, or whatever language is yours, spoken in the particular register of someone who is trying to be understood across a gap they know is unbridgeable. You say something simple. You say it clearly. You use whatever simple words might conceivably gesture toward the information he wants. A name, perhaps your own name, offered with a gesture toward your chest that the universal grammar of human communication associates with self-identification. The man from the colonnade listens. His face does not change dramatically, but something in it changes. The set of his expression shifts from patient expectation to something more careful. He looks at the man to his left. The man to his left is older, perhaps 55, with a face that has weathered many decades of Roman summers. And he is now looking at you with an expression of concentrated attention, the way a person concentrates when they are trying to identify a sound or a smell that is familiar without being nameable. He says something. The man from the colonnade responds. They are conferring. You are the subject. You are present for the conference, standing 2 meters away in the noon heat, and you cannot understand a word of it, and the conference is about you. The older man speaks again, and this time he speaks to you directly, and what he says is longer, more words, more information conveyed, the tone of someone who is being thorough. He might be listing possibilities. He might be asking a more specific version of the first question, where do you come from? He might be asking about your patron, about your master, about the household or the business or the merchant company you belong to. He is asking, in whatever form the question is taking, for the one thing you cannot give him. He is asking for your place in the world. You gesture. You spread your hands in the way that means, you hope it means, I cannot understand you. It is a gesture with no fixed grammar, no guaranteed translation, but it is one of the few truly human signals that crosses language barriers with reasonable reliability. The helpless, open-handed gesture of incomprehension. The 3 men look at each other. What follows is not what you feared. It is not a seizure, not a violent resolution. What follows is something both more manageable and more complicated than violence, because violence would be simple. What follows is a negotiation, a 3-way negotiation between 3 Romans trying to decide what category you belong to, with you present but unable to participate. The older man says something to the man from the colonnade with the decisive tone of a conclusion. The man from the colonnade nods. The third man, who has been mostly silent, shorter than the other 2, with the watchful eyes of someone who is good at waiting, says something that sounds like an objection or a qualification, and the older man responds to it. And the man from the colonnade says something that appears to settle it. You watch this exchange with the desperate attentiveness of someone trying to lip read in a language they don't speak. You catch nothing meaningful. The content is opaque. But the structure, the social structure of the exchange, the way decisions are made, the way consensus is built between 3 men who know each other and trust each other's judgment, that structure reads clearly, and what it tells you is that a decision has been made. The older man looks at you. He makes a gesture, a clear, unambiguous gesture, the kind of gesture that needs no translation. He gestures for you to follow him, not aggressively, not with the grip and drag physicality of an arrest. He gestures the way a person gestures when they are taking responsibility for a situation, deliberately, with a slight formality, with the expectation of compliance. He turns and begins to walk. He expects you to walk with him. The man from the colonnade positions himself slightly behind you. Not at your back in a hostile sense, not the behind of a guard, but at the behind of someone who is part of a group and is walking as part of the group. The third man, the one who made the objection, is walking to your right, and his position is the same, not a grip, not a restraint, but a presence that defines the boundaries of the group you are now part of. You are not under arrest. You are under escort. In Roman law and Roman social practice, there is a distinction between these things that is meaningful and important, and that distinction will matter to how the next hours unfold. An arrest implies a specific charge, a specific crime, a specific legal process that begins to roll with its own momentum toward a defined destination. An escort implies something more preliminary, more ambiguous. The act of taking someone who cannot account for themselves to a place where they can be more properly accounted for. Where you are being escorted is not yet clear. You walk with them. You have no better option. Running. The option presents itself briefly and is dismissed almost as quickly, because running in Rome is not a strategy, it is a spectacle. Running in these streets, which you do not know and which have no exits you can identify, with 3 men behind you who know them perfectly, is not escape. It is panic wearing the costume of action. You walk. The streets you move through are busy. Rome does not pause for what is happening to you. Around you, the normal operations of the city proceed without interruption. A man haggles with a vegetable seller while you pass. 2 slaves carry a sedan chair through the intersection ahead, their coordinated gait as practiced as dancers. A dog trots purposefully in the opposite direction. The world is indifferent to your situation in the way that cities are always indifferent to individual situations, and there is something both terrible and oddly steadying about this indifference. People notice your group. Not dramatically, not stopping, not pointing, but glances track you as you pass. You are reading the glances more accurately now than you were this morning, your perception calibrated by hours of practice, and what you read in them is mostly curiosity with a small admixture of recognition. People recognize what they are seeing. 3 men and a foreigner walking together. The foreigner in the middle, the configuration that signals something. What they call this situation in their own language, what word they give to the relationship between the 3 men and you, is something you do not know. But they know it. They have seen it before. The older man leads. His pace is unhurried. He walks with the confidence of a man who knows these streets because he has walked them for decades. He greets someone at a doorway. A brief exchange, a wave of the hand, without breaking stride. He is known here. He is a person of the neighborhood, someone with a presence in this local fabric of relationships, and you are currently attached to that presence, which means that you are, for the first time all morning, visible in a new way, not as an inexplicable solitary figure, but as something attached to someone explicable. This is not a comfortable position, but it is a different position from where you were 5 minutes ago. The route takes you around one corner, then another. The street narrows, then opens slightly. You pass the entrance to a courtyard building, an insula. Its door opened to reveal a small courtyard with a central garden, the sound of voices from upper floors, the smell of a communal cooking fire. Then the older man stops. You are standing in front of a building that is neither a home nor a shop. Its facade has an official quality, not the elaborate decoration of a temple, not the commercial openness of a shop front, but the particular plainness of a building whose purpose is administrative. A wooden notice board is mounted near the entrance, a tablet of whitened board covered in writing. Several smaller boards are stacked beside it. The entrance is an open doorway, and just inside the doorway, visible from the street, there is a man sitting at a table. The older man speaks to the man at the table. The man at the table looks at you with the measuring attention of someone whose job involves measuring things. He says something. The older man responds. A brief back and forth, and then the man at the table picks up a stylus and draws his wax writing tablet toward him. You understand, being registered. This building is one of Rome's neighborhood administrative stations, associated with the Vici, the local administrative units that divide the city into small, manageable zones of civic responsibility. The man at the table is some kind of administrative official or the assistant to one, and his job includes the keeping of records. Records of what happens in this neighborhood. Records of complaints. Records of unusual occurrences. Records of persons brought to the attention of the administration by concerned citizens. He is writing about you. He is writing while he looks at you, taking down the information that the older man is providing. A physical description, presumably, and the circumstances of your discovery, and whatever preliminary assessment the 3 men have formed about what you are. The man at the table asks you something. His voice is not unkind. He is doing his job. He is asking for the information that his form, or his tablet, requires. Your name, probably. Your origin. Your patron. Your purpose. You say your name. You say it in your own way, the way it sounds in the language it comes from, with the sounds that Latin does not have, with the stresses that Latin never puts in those places. The man at the table writes something. He looks at what he has written. He looks at you. He says something that sounds like a question. You say your name again. He writes something else. What he writes is almost certainly a Latinized approximation of the sounds you are making, the best rendering available in an alphabet without the letters your name requires. And the result is something that sounds like your name the way a photocopy of a painting sounds like music. The relationship is there if you look hard enough, but the thing itself is gone. The older man continues providing information. The man at the table writes. The man from the colonnade contributes something, adds some detail, probably from his observations this morning. The third man stands near the door and watches the street. You stand in the middle of this process, this bureaucratic transaction whose subject you are and whose content you cannot access, and you are aware of several things. You are aware that something official is happening, something that creates a record, and that once a record exists, your situation is different from before it existed. Not necessarily worse, not necessarily better, but different, because records in Rome are not nothing. Records connect to things. Records can be consulted by the people who need to consult records. Records are one of the mechanisms by which Rome maintains its extraordinary knowledge of who is in the city and what they are doing. You are also aware that the man at the table is finishing his writing and is now asking you something directly. He asks it with the particular patience of a bureaucrat who has asked many questions of many people and has developed a professional tolerance for the range of responses such questions generate. He holds his stylus ready. He is waiting for an answer he can write down. You answer. You answer in your language, knowing it is useless because there is nothing else to do. He listens. He sets down his stylus. He looks at the older man with the expression of a professional confronting a problem that falls outside his standard categories. They exchange something, several words, a brief assessment. The older man shrugs, which is a gesture Romans use in essentially the same way it is used today, and says something that sounds like a qualified conclusion, like a provisional answer to a question that doesn't have a proper answer. The man at the table writes something else. He looks at it. He underlines something, perhaps, or adds a mark. Then he sets down his stylus and speaks to you again, more slowly. And this time what he says sounds, just from the shape of it, from the formality of the tone and the deliberateness of the delivery, like an instruction or a warning. Something he wants you to understand and to which he wants your acknowledgement. You nod. It is the only response available to you. It is almost certainly not the correct response to whatever he has said, but it is a human response, and he accepts it with the wearied pragmatism of a man who has dealt with situations that don't fit his categories before and has learned that some situations require provisional acceptance pending further clarification. He says something to the older man. The older man says something back. And this is the first thing that has surprised you in some time. The older man turns to you and, with a gesture that combines the practical with the particular kindness of a man who is doing what he thinks is right, gestures toward a bench against the wall. He is telling you to sit. He is telling you to wait. You sit. Waiting in a Roman administrative space in the early afternoon of a summer day is not a passive experience. The small room has a life of its own. People come and go. A man arrives with what appears to be a noise complaint. He is agitated, gesturing broadly, and the man at the table receives his complaint with the patient inscrutability of a man who hears many complaints and has learned to ration his visible reactions. A woman arrives with a document and a question. The man at the table examines the document and provides an answer that seems to satisfy her. Two men arrive together speaking quickly, in a tone that suggests urgency, and the man at the table calls something toward the back of the building, and a younger man appears from behind a curtain and is dispatched with instructions. You watch all of this from your bench, and you feel your body's situation more clearly than you have all day. Sitting still, after hours of walking, the accumulated deficits of the day present themselves with new specificity. Your feet hurt, not dramatically but consistently, the particular ache of stone miles. Your stomach has moved past the active hunger stage into something quieter but more hollow, a physical emptiness that sits just below your ribs and makes every breath slightly shallower than it should be. Your mouth is dry again. The last drink was at the trough, perhaps an hour ago. Your head aches, faintly, in the specific way that dehydration and heat and stress and too much sun produce in combination. You are, by any reasonable physical accounting, in mild distress. Not critical distress. You are not in immediate danger from the physical deficits of this day. But you are not well. The afternoon heat has reached its peak outside and is making itself felt even in here, even in this stone-walled room with its one open doorway. The air sits still and warm. Flies investigate the corners. Somewhere at the back of the building, beyond the curtain, a voice is speaking steadily in the tone of someone dictating. You have been sitting for perhaps 20 minutes when the older man returns. He had left. You did not notice when, your attention having been on the other comings and goings, and he returns now with someone. The someone is a man of perhaps 60 years, gray-bearded, wearing better clothing than most of what you have seen today, a tunic of finer weave with a narrow border of color at the hem. He carries himself with the ease of a man accustomed to being listened to. He is not an important official, not a senator, not a magistrate of significant rank, but he is a man of local standing, the kind of man that a Roman neighborhood turns to when it needs someone who has experience and judgment and the social weight to act on them. He is, you will gradually understand, the local vicomagister, or an associate of the vicomagister, the elected neighborhood official responsible for the administration of this vicus, this small unit of Roman civic geography. These men are not full-time administrators in the professional modern sense. They are prominent local residents, typically freedmen who have achieved some measure of success and standing, who take on the responsibility of neighborhood administration as a civic duty and as an expression of their social standing. They manage the local shrines. They organize the neighborhood festivals. They keep the records. They handle the problems. You are a problem. He sits across from you. He looks at you, not with the rapid assessment of the man from the colonnade, not with the bureaucratic patience of the man at the table, but with a different kind of attention, the attention of someone who is trying to understand something before he decides what to do about it. He looks at your clothing for a long time. He looks at your shoes. He looks at your hands. Then he begins to speak. And he speaks slowly and clearly, with the deliberate articulation of a man trying to be understood, and he speaks in Latin first, and then, watching your face, he tries something else. Another language. Probably Greek, which is Rome's second language, the language of the educated, the language of the eastern provinces, a language that any well-traveled Roman of reasonable education has at least some access to. Greek sounds different from Latin. The music of it is different, more fluid, more open in its vowels. You don't speak Greek, but you recognize, from whatever dim reservoir of cultural exposure you carry, that he has shifted registers. He is trying. You shake your head. You gesture, the open-handed gesture, and say something in your own language, slowly, clearly, trying to give the sounds the best possible chance of carrying some meaning, knowing they carry none. He tries a third language, something that you cannot identify, shorter sounds, more guttural, perhaps one of the languages of the Danubian provinces or the Germanic frontier, a language that well-connected Romans of a certain administrative experience might have acquired. You shake your head again. He leans back slightly. He looks at you with an expression that you can read clearly, because it is the expression of a man who has eliminated possibilities and arrived at the conclusion that remains. He has tried Latin, Greek, and a third language. You speak none of them. You speak something that he cannot identify at all. This is the data he has. He says something to the older man, who has been standing nearby throughout this exchange. The older man responds. The vicomagister or his associate says something back, and the two of them have a brief conversation in the compressed, efficient way of two men who have worked together before and can communicate in shorthand. Then the official turns back to you and does something unexpected. He gestures toward you. He points at your clothing, specifically at a detail of it, something unusual, and he makes a gesture that clearly means, explain this. He is asking not just what you are, but what the clothing means. He understands, on some level, that the clothing is information, that it comes from somewhere, that it was made by someone, that it represents a kind of evidence even if he cannot read it yet. You look down at yourself. Your clothing, which you stopped thinking about several hours ago because there was too much else to think about, presents itself to your attention with new eyes. You see it the way he is seeing it. The stitching, machine stitching, perfectly regular, absolutely consistent, the kind of stitching that human hands cannot produce with anything approaching this precision. If there is synthetic fiber in what you are wearing, it is a texture that does not exist anywhere in the Roman world. The dye, if it is a modern chemical dye, is too uniform, too perfectly consistent across the entire surface of the fabric to be natural dye, which always has some variation, some shading, some evidence of the organic process that produced it. These are details that this man cannot articulate in those terms. He does not have the vocabulary for synthetic fiber or machine stitching or industrial dyeing. But he can see that something is wrong. He has handled many fabrics in his life, from the rough woolen tunics of workers to the fine silks that arrive from the eastern trade routes. And what you are wearing matches none of his categories. He reaches out and touches the fabric of your sleeve, not aggressively, but with the deliberate, assessing touch of someone gathering evidence. He rubs it between his fingers. He looks at his fingers. He looks at the fabric. He says something that might be a question addressed to himself rather than to you. He is trying to figure out where you are from. And this is where the situation clarifies itself in a way that adds a new layer to everything. Because the official is not operating from malice. He is operating from the logic of his own world. And in his world, the solution to an inexplicable person is almost always a matter of correct categorization. His world is large. Rome at this moment is the center of an empire that stretches from Scotland to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. People from extraordinary distances end up in this city. Traders from India, whose spices reach Rome through layers of intermediary commerce. Slaves from sub-Saharan Africa, whose presence in Roman households is documented. Diplomats from Parthia, from Armenia, from kingdoms along the Silk Road, whose names are barely known even to the Romans. The official is not without resources for thinking about distant origins. He simply needs to find the right one. He tries something new. He begins speaking in a slow, clear, careful way, not asking questions now, but making statements, pointing at himself and saying a word, pointing at you and making a questioning gesture, pointing in different directions and saying words that are probably the names of places or peoples. He is running through his catalog of known peoples and places, looking for a flicker of recognition on your face. He says words. You don't know most of them, but some of them arrive with enough context. The name of a place you have read about, an ancient city, a people, that you almost recognize them, not from their Latin form, but from what your own language has made of them over 2,000 years of transmission. Almost. Not quite. His catalog runs for perhaps 3 or 4 minutes. He watches your face the entire time with the careful patience of a man panning for something valuable in a large quantity of uncertain material. He does not find it. He stops. He looks at you. He says something quiet and considered to the older man. The older man says something back. There is a pause. Then the official stands. He is not done with this situation, but he is done with this immediate phase of it. He is going to do something. Make an inquiry, consult a record, send a message. And in the meantime, the something that needs to happen to you while he does those things is that you need to stay where you can be found. He speaks to the man at the table. The man at the table nods and says something to you. He points at the bench. He holds up a hand. The universal sign for wait, for stay, for do not leave. You are not under arrest, but you are not free. You wait. The afternoon advances. You can measure its passage by the light through the doorway, the angle of it changing, the shadows it throws on the opposite wall lengthening from their noon minimum back toward the long lines of late afternoon. The heat in the room peaks and very gradually, very slowly, begins to ease. Flies. Voices from the street. The man at the table writing, receiving visitors, dispatching them, writing again. You are thirsty. You have been thirsty for hours and the thirst has been a constant companion. But sitting still in the heat has intensified it from a companion into something more insistent, a physical demand that your body is making with growing impatience. Your lips are slightly dry. There is a roughness to your swallowing. You look at the man at the table. You gesture, a mime so simple that it has no cultural ambiguity. Cupped hands, the motion of raising them to your lips. Water. He looks at you. He says something. Then he calls toward the back of the room and says something else. And after a moment, a younger man appears, a boy, really, perhaps 14, probably a slave of this administrative office, carrying a clay cup. The boy brings it to you. The water is not as cold as the aqueduct fountains. It has been standing in a container somewhere and has acquired the temperature of the room. But it is water, and you drink it in 2 long swallows. And the boy takes back the cup with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone performing a routine task. And the man at the table has already returned to his work. This small act of provision, unremarkable from the outside, a cup of room-temperature water given to someone sitting on a bench, moves through you with a disproportionate force. Not because of the water itself, though the water helps, but because of what it represents. Someone in this system, operating within the logic of this system, provided something basic and necessary without requiring anything from you in return. Not because they are unusually kind, because you were thirsty and you were in their space, and giving you water was the appropriate thing to do. Rome has a logic. It has a logic that produces this cup of water for a stranger. It also has a logic that has produced this bench and this waiting and this investigation of what you are and where you belong. These are not in contradiction. They are aspects of the same system. You sit with this for a while. The older man returns without the official. He carries something, a piece of flat bread, the same round-scored bread you saw in the bakery this morning, what feels like a lifetime ago. He holds it out to you. He says something brief, and, from its tone, matter of fact. He is not making a gift. He is providing what you need with the unsentimental practicality of someone who has decided that keeping you functional is in everyone's interest. You take the bread. It is hard. Not stale hard, but bread hard. The genuine density of a Roman loaf, made with grain ground by stone mills, leavened with a sourdough culture that has been maintained in this city for generations, baked in a wood-fired oven at temperatures that produce a crust like compressed stone and an interior that is chewy and dense and tastes of grain and smoke and the specific mineral quality of Rome's water. It is the most purely satisfying food you have ever put in your mouth because you have been awake for 6 or 7 hours and have had nothing. You eat it slowly. You eat it with the specific attention of a person who is genuinely hungry for the first time. Not the mild inconvenience of a missed meal, but the deeper hunger that comes from a sustained deficit, the hunger that makes simple food revelatory. The older man watches you eat without watching you. That particular Roman skill of observing without appearing to observe. When you finish, he takes back the cloth it came wrapped in with a small nod and leaves again. You sit on the bench with bread in your stomach and water in your blood and the afternoon sun moving across the doorway, and you think. You think about what is happening and what is going to happen, and for the first time since the alley you think with something approaching clarity, because the edge of the hunger has been softened and the water has done some of what water does, and the immediate physical crisis is reduced enough to allow the cognitive one to surface. What is going to happen is not certain, but it has a shape. Somewhere in Rome, the official who sat across from you is making inquiries. He is, in the way of his world and his position, consulting his resources. He may be checking records, the records of foreign merchants registered in the city, the records of ship manifests, the records of travelers who have presented themselves at Rome's administrative entry points. He may be speaking to colleagues in other neighborhoods, asking whether they have seen anything similar. He may be speaking to people who deal regularly with foreigners, the harbor officials, the merchants who trade with distant places, the officials who manage the Jewish community on the Tiber's far bank, the officials who deal with the communities of Syrians and Egyptians and Greeks who have established their own social enclaves in the city. He is looking for the category you fit. And here is what you understand, sitting on this bench in the afternoon heat. He will not find it. He is an experienced man, a man of broad knowledge by the standards of his world, a man who has, over the decades of his service, encountered a remarkable range of human variety. But the category he is looking for does not exist in his world, because the place you come from does not exist in his world, and the time you come from does not exist in his world, and the things that made you, the society, the technology, the language, the assumptions, are separated from where you are sitting by a gulf of years so vast that it makes the entire known world of Rome look like a single afternoon. He will exhaust his categories and arrive at something. What he arrives at, what Roman administrative logic arrives at, when it has exhausted the categories of free citizen, freedman, foreign merchant, foreign slave, foreign dignitary, wandering philosopher, displaced prisoner of war, runaway, and lunatic, is something you have been not thinking about all day. Roman society rests on a foundation that modern societies have, for the most part, dismantled. A foundation so fundamental to this world that it is not experienced as a foundation at all. It is simply the nature of things, the way the world is organized, the assumption on which everything else rests. The foundation is slavery. Not slavery as an aberration, not slavery as a stain on an otherwise normal social fabric. Slavery as architecture. Slavery as the structural principle of the Roman economy, the Roman household, the Roman city. At this moment in Roman history, slaves constitute somewhere between a quarter and a third of the population of Italy, and in the city of Rome itself the proportion is probably higher. Every household of any means has them. The public infrastructure of the city is maintained by them. The great agricultural estates of the Roman aristocracy are worked by them. The mines, the quarries, the galleys, all of these run on enslaved labor. And Rome's legal system, which is sophisticated and elaborate and the ancestor of much of modern Western law, has developed an equally sophisticated and elaborate set of doctrines for managing the institution that underlies everything. One of those doctrines concerns the burden of proof. In Roman law, a person claiming free status bears the burden of demonstrating that claim, not the reverse. This seems, from a modern perspective, backwards. We assume freedom is the default, the condition that needs no demonstration. But in Rome, where the legal boundary between slave and free person is one of the most consequential distinctions the law maintains, and where the financial interests at stake in that distinction are enormous, and where enslaved people do sometimes run away and do sometimes claim free status falsely. In this environment, the law has decided that freedom requires evidence, not its absence. You cannot provide evidence. You cannot name your father, which is one of the primary ways a free Roman establishes free birth. You cannot name your tribe, which for Roman citizens is another form of proof. You cannot produce a manumission document, which is what a freedman carries to prove that their slave status ended. You cannot name a former owner, which would at least establish the history that explains your current situation. You cannot produce any of the documentary evidence that the Roman state might accept as proof of any status at all. You are, in the vocabulary of Roman law, a person of unknown status. And in Roman law, a person of unknown status in the possession of authority is handled through processes that begin with detainment and investigation. And that can, if no evidence of free status is produced, end somewhere that you do not want to let yourself think about too clearly just yet. The bread sits in your stomach. You breathe carefully. The official returns in the late afternoon. The light through the doorway is tilting now toward gold, the specific gold of a Roman afternoon in summer, and the temperature has begun its gradual descent from the peak of midday. And the sounds of the street have changed slightly, less the morning energy of commerce and more the sustained, continuous sound of a city that has been at work all day and has not yet stopped. He brings someone with him, a third person, someone you haven't seen before. This new person is younger, perhaps 35, and carries himself differently from the official. There is something about him that suggests a different kind of work, a different kind of engagement with the world. His Latin, when he begins to speak, seems to come at a different speed from what you have been hearing all day. Not the careful, educated Latin of the official, but something more clipped, more professional. He is, you gradually understand, someone who has been brought specifically because of his experience with foreigners. Perhaps a harbor official. Perhaps someone who works with the community of merchants at the port, or with the administrative apparatus that manages Rome's enormous foreign resident population. He has, over years of such work, acquired fragments of many languages, enough Greek to manage most Eastern merchants, a few phrases of Aramaic, some Germanic sounds, some words from the language communities of North Africa. He tries them all on you. He works through them with methodical professionalism, not unkindly, but without illusions. He is not trying to make you feel comfortable. He is trying to solve a problem, and his professionalism is the professionalism of someone who has a job to do. He speaks. He watches your face. He moves to the next. He speaks. He watches. When he has gone through his repertoire without finding anything, he does something interesting. He looks at you for a long moment, and then he begins to list sounds. Not words, but sounds, the raw phonetic material of languages, a kind of linguistic exploration of the sounds your voice makes when you speak. He is trying to hear the shape of your language. You say something for him. You say something in your own language, something simple, because he seems to be asking for it, seems to be offering this as a form of analysis. He listens with his eyes closed. He listens with the specific, concentrated attention of someone who processes language professionally. He opens his eyes. He says something to the official, something careful and specific. The official responds with a short question. The language specialist says something longer, and in the middle of what he says you catch a word, just one, embedded in the Latin around it, that you almost recognize. It is the name of a people, or of a place, a name that belongs to the periphery of the Roman world, some distant northern shore, some barely known coast at the far edge of the empire, or beyond it. He is proposing a possible origin for you. He does not sound certain. He sounds like a man offering his best available guess with appropriate hedging. The official considers this. He asks a question. The specialist responds with qualifications. The official looks at you with the specific expression of a man who has reached a conclusion that doesn't fully satisfy him, but is the best available conclusion. He has found a category for you. It is almost certainly wrong. You are not from wherever he thinks you are from. But he has found the category that best fits the available evidence. The sounds of your speech, the unfamiliar material of your clothing, the absence of any documentation. And he has settled on it because settling on a wrong category is more workable than having no category at all. What happens next will follow from this category. The older man, who has been present throughout the afternoon, becomes more active now. He speaks to the official with a directness that suggests some specific proposal. The official listens, nods slowly, asks a question. The older man responds at length. The official looks at you. He looks at the older man. He seems to be weighing something. What he is weighing, you will come to understand through the pattern of what follows, is a question of custody. The question of where you will be and with whose responsibility you will rest while the investigation continues, because the investigation is not finished. A wrong category is better than no category, but it is not a resolution. The official knows what he does not know, and what he does not know is enough to require continued attention. The older man is, apparently, offering to take that responsibility. This is not an obvious thing. Taking custody of an unidentified foreigner carries obligations. If you cause damage or commit offenses, the person who vouched for you bears some of that liability. Roman law on this point is detailed. The person who takes in a stranger becomes, in some legal sense, responsible for the stranger's behavior. The older man, in offering this, is accepting an obligation. Why he is doing this is something you cannot know for certain. You can only observe the results of the decision. Romans do not generally extend charity without understanding it as part of a broader social economy. The economy of obligation and reciprocity that runs through every level of Roman society, from the patron-client relationships of the elite to the informal mutual aid of the poorest neighborhoods. The older man may see in you an opportunity, not a malicious one, but the opportunity that someone with a useful skill occasionally represents, however uncertain your status. He may have something in mind for you. Or he may simply be a person who, having become involved in this situation, has decided that involvement requires completion. In any case, the official appears to agree. There is a brief formal exchange. Something written is produced, something acknowledged, the bureaucratic confirmation of an informal arrangement. And then the older man turns to you and makes the same gesture he made hours ago, at the beginning of all this. Follow me. The city is different in the late afternoon. You notice it immediately as you step back into the street, a different quality of movement and sound. The intense, purposeful morning commerce has given way to something more complex. The workshops are still running, but the men working them are doing so with the particular efficiency of people approaching the end of a working day, a slightly different rhythm from the morning's energy. The street vendors are at a different stage of their inventory. Less to sell, prices shifting, the endgame calculations of daily commerce. Children are more numerous now, having been released from whatever morning occupations kept them contained. The smell of food is stronger. Actual cooking, not just the bread and olive oil of the morning markets, but the more complex smells of afternoon meal preparation rising from the apartments and the thermopolia, the hot food counters that serve as Rome's fast food infrastructure. The thermopolium you pass is a thing worth noting. A counter of volcanic stone, its surface set with large circular holes into which ceramic vessels are embedded. Behind the counter, a man and a woman are working with the coordinated efficiency of people who have been doing this together for years. The vessels contain food, stewed lentils, chickpeas and oil, a meat and vegetable preparation that you cannot identify with certainty. People are lined up, not formally but organically, the queue that forms around a popular food source. They hold containers, clay bowls, pieces of flatbread used as edible plates. They exchange money. They receive food. They eat standing at the counter or move a few meters away to eat while leaning against a wall. The smell of it passes through you like a physical force. You have had bread. It was not nothing. But the afternoon has been long and the bread was not much, and the food in those vessels is real food, substantial food, the kind of food that constitutes an actual meal in Roman terms. You keep walking. The older man does not stop. He leads you through several more streets, through a district you have not been in before, residential, largely, The long facades of insula blocks with their ground floor shops mostly winding down for the day, the street-level shutters being folded back into place or locks being applied. A blacksmith finishing his afternoon work, the coals in his forge being banked down with the practiced movements of someone who has done this 10,000 times. A woman collecting water from a street fountain with the slightly weary efficiency of someone who has been managing household logistics all day and has several tasks still to complete. The older man stops at a building, not a house. This is an insula, 5 stories, its ground floor occupied by a tavern whose sign is a painted amphora above the door. He speaks briefly to someone near the door, an exchange of a few words, familiar in tone, and then leads you inside. The tavern is not what a modern word conjures. It is a single large room at ground level, its front wall open to the street in the manner of all Roman commercial ground floors, with a wooden counter near the entrance behind which 2 amphorae are racked and a smaller vessel of something hot stands on a brazier. The floor is stone, swept but not clean in any deep sense, marked with the accumulated use of years. Tables, rough wooden things, are set at irregular intervals, and most of them are occupied. The people here are not wealthy. They are the people of the neighborhood at the end of a working day. Craftspeople, workers, people who live in the upper floors of this building or the buildings nearby. People who stop here because stopping here is what you do at the end of the afternoon when the day's labor is done and dinner will not be ready for another hour and the apartment is hot and small and the company of people you know is better than its absence. They look at you when you enter because everyone in a room looks at a new arrival. But the older man is known here. He is known here well. You can see that immediately in the way the man behind the counter acknowledges him, in the way a man at one of the tables raises a hand, and your presence, attached to his, is processed and filed as his business in a way that reduces the sustained scrutiny you have been receiving all day. You sit at a table in the corner. The older man sits across from you. He calls something to the man behind the counter, who responds and begins moving. What arrives is a clay cup and a small pitcher of what is almost certainly wine mixed with water, the pasca or diluted wine that constitutes the everyday drink of ordinary Romans. Wine being drunk in Rome the way water is drunk in modern cities, an ordinary daily accompaniment to life that has more to do with the safety of the water supply and the caloric needs of working people than with any particular culture of drinking. Wine in Rome is not a luxury. It is a nutrient. You drink it. It is tart and slightly warm and tastes of clay and something herbed, and it is, like the bread hours before it, the best thing you have tasted in as long as you can remember. The older man watches you drink. He drinks from his own cup. He is not relaxed. Exactly. He is a man with an unresolved situation on his hands, and relaxation requires resolution. But he has the quality of someone who has decided that the situation will not be resolved this afternoon and has made his peace with that timeline. He tries something. He speaks to you, not the careful official Latin of the administrative station, but the ordinary conversational Latin of a man talking to another man over a cup of wine. He says something and points at himself. His name. He is giving you his name. He repeats it. He says it with the slight emphasis of someone who wants you to hear it, to keep it. You hear it. You file it. It is a Latin name, and like everything in this world, it has a specificity and a rootedness. It belongs to a family, to a history, to a place in the city's social fabric that you cannot access. But you say it back to him. Your pronunciation is imperfect, but recognizable enough that he nods slightly. He points at you with a question. Your name. You say it. He repeats it back in his Latin approximation, the Latinized sounds that were written on the administrative tablet earlier. He seems to understand that this approximation is imperfect. He tries it a different way. You correct him, gently, saying it the right way again. He tries again. This small negotiation over the sound of your name takes perhaps 3 minutes, and it is absurd, and it is, in its absurdity, also the most direct communication you have managed with any person all day. He is trying. You are helping him try. Between you, you are building one tiny shared thing. The sound of your name in his mouth, imperfect but intended, and it is not nothing. He learns your name, or his best available version of it. He says it once more, gets a nod from you, and seems satisfied. He drinks. The tavern fills as the afternoon moves toward evening. Men come in ones and twos, some taking seats, some standing at the counter in the way of men who have one drink and a conversation and then continue home. The sound of it builds, not the overwhelming sound of the street, but the more intimate sound of a room full of people talking. The overlapping conversations of 30 people all knowing each other to varying degrees and all using this space as a social commons. You are part of this, in a peripheral way. The older man, whose name you now have, though you could not reproduce it perfectly, has positioned you at this table and has, by the social calculus of the room, made himself your point of connection to it. People who know him acknowledge his presence, and your presence, attached to his, is noted and provisionally accepted. A man at the next table speaks to him and glances at you. He responds with something brief, and from his tone it sounds like a summary explanation. The foreigner can't place where he's from, waiting on the Vicomagister's people to sort it out. The man at the next table shrugs and makes a comment and returns to his own conversation. You are being explained, however inadequately. Being explained is better than being inexplicable. A plate of food arrives. You did not see it ordered. It must have been included in whatever the older man said to the counterman when you arrived. Bread, a shallow bowl of something that is lentils with oil and herbs, a small piece of what might be salt fish. It is set in front of you without ceremony. You eat it with the focused attention of someone who has been hungry all day and for whom food has acquired a clarity of importance it rarely has in ordinary life. The lentils are wonderful. You recognize that this is hunger talking. That hunger makes every meal revelatory in a way that has nothing to do with quality, but it doesn't change the experience. The herbs are something you don't quite identify. The fish is very salty and very good. The bread is the same hard Roman bread. You eat all of it. While you eat, you watch. You watch the room. You watch the people. And you find yourself, after a day of terror and disorientation and the constant low-level panic of existence in a world you cannot navigate, doing something you have not done since early morning, observing with something close to equanimity. Not peace, you are far from peace, but a kind of suspended state that comes from having passed through the worst of the afternoon's crisis and found yourself still here, still intact, still fed, still watered, and sitting in a room full of people who are not, at this moment, actively doing anything alarming. The room is, in its own terms, beautiful. The evening light coming through the open front wall is the light of the golden hour, low and amber, touching the dust in the air and the stone of the walls with a quality of illumination that a painter would recognize as a gift. The faces of the men around you, in this light, are faces of extraordinary variety and life. The variety of a city that has been absorbing people from across the known world for centuries, faces carrying in their angles and their coloring the distant genetic echoes of places from the British Isles to Persia. They are laughing, arguing, listening, thinking. They are doing what people in taverns do in every century. They are being human in the particular way that being human together in a place at the end of a long day looks like. You will not survive in this city. You understand that clearly now, with the bread and lentils settling into the lower reaches of your hunger and the thin wine doing its very modest work. One day has demonstrated this beyond reasonable argument. You have no Latin. You have no money. You have no identity that this world can verify or process. You have no way to build any of these things from nothing in a world that requires you to have had them all along. Even if you were not in the current situation, the investigation, the administrative custody, the unresolved question of your status. Even without any of that, the simple arithmetic of survival in Rome without resources and without language is arithmetic that does not add up favorably. But you are here now. You are here, in this tavern, in this evening light, with this food inside you and this cup in your hand, and the full weight of what has happened today. The alley, the streets, the forums, the markets, the official questioning, the bread given without sentimentality by a man who had no obligation to give it. All of it is present in you simultaneously. Night comes to Rome gradually, and then completely. The gradual part begins when the sun touches the western skyline, when the amber of the golden hour deepens into the first blush of sunset, and the shadows, which have been leaning eastward all afternoon, begin to merge and extend, and the sharp light that has defined the city all day begins to soften and then to falter. The complete part comes faster than you expect. This is one of the things that modern people, accustomed to the perpetual semi-light of electrified cities, Do not anticipate about the ancient world, how dark it becomes. Not progressively dark, the way a modern city dims through gradual degrees from its daytime state. Dark the way a flame goes out, suddenly and absolutely. The sun sets and Rome does not illuminate itself. Rome does not have street lighting in any comprehensive sense. There are torches at certain doorways, oil lamps hung above certain entrances, the light from tavern doorways and the windows of buildings where people are still awake. But these are islands of light in a sea of darkness, and the sea is very dark. You are still in the tavern when this happens, and the tavern changes with the darkness. Oil lamps are lit, small clay lamps with wicks dipped in olive oil, producing a warm, modest, intimate light that illuminates faces and corners but does not reach the walls. The room becomes a smaller, more concentrated place. The sounds of the street outside change. The daytime commerce has ceased. The deliveries and transactions and the continuous human traffic of the waking city has given way to a different set of sounds. Quieter in some ways, stranger in others. Rome's night is not peaceful. This is something that the Romans themselves acknowledge. The poets complain about it. The satirists describe it with rueful exaggeration. The historical records document its dangers with a matter-of-fact tone of people describing an accepted feature of their environment. The streets of Rome at night are, in the precise definition of the word, dangerous. Part of this danger is practical. The streets, unlit, are difficult to navigate even for people who know them well. The surface is uneven. The channels cut into the road for drainage are invisible in the dark and turn ankles. The stepping stones that allow you to cross the wider streets without stepping in the accumulations of the day are hard to find without light. People who fall in the dark in Rome fall on volcanic stone, and they fall without witnesses, and no one comes. Part of the danger is human. Rome's night population is different from its day population. The daytime city belongs to commerce and administration and the organized social life of a functioning society. The nighttime city belongs to different categories. The carts that are forbidden from entering the city during daylight hours, because the traffic they generate would make the streets impassable, pour in after sunset. The delivery infrastructure of a city that consumes in staggering quantities. Their wooden wheels on stone creating a noise that the poets describe as something it is impossible to sleep through. Night workers, the people who labor when the streets are clear enough to work in. The vigilas on their rounds, watching for fire, watching for disorder. The people who have nowhere to go, and those who take advantage of darkness. Rome has always had them. It has laws against them. The night streets have been the subject of legal regulations since the early republic. It has the vigilas specifically empowered to manage them. But laws and enforcement are not the same thing, and the darkness is wide and the vigilas are not everywhere. And the person who is alone on the streets of Rome after full dark without weapons, without companions, without the social standing that provides some protection even in the dark, is a person in a position of genuine vulnerability. The older man makes a decision about this. As the evening progresses and the tavern's lamplit warmth becomes more clearly the alternative to something less comfortable outside, he speaks to you directly, with gestures supplementing the words he knows you cannot understand. He points at the floor. He makes a sleeping gesture. He points at you. He points at the floor again. He is telling you that you will sleep here, on the floor of this room, or somewhere in this building, on the terms of whatever arrangement he has made with the tavern keeper. Not a bed, not in any sense a comfortable night. The floor of a Roman tavern, stone or compressed earth, is not a bed, but it is inside. It is out of the street. It is in a place where there are people who are at least nominally responsible for your presence, and that nominal responsibility is the difference, tonight, between manageable danger and something worse. You nod. You make the gesture of understanding and acceptance, the nod that has become your primary communication tool all day. He speaks briefly to the tavern keeper, who responds with something that sounds like acceptance, a slightly weary acceptance, the tone of a man agreeing to something that is not his preference but falls within the range of acceptable arrangements. Money changes hands. Not much. You can see from the denomination and the brevity of the exchange that this is a very modest transaction. But it is a transaction, and it is being paid by the older man, and you are aware of this with a specific, uncomfortable clarity. He is spending money on you. He has spent time on you. He has fed you and watered you and navigated the afternoon's administrative situation on your behalf and arranged your shelter for the night. He is doing all of this for reasons you cannot fully understand, for a person he cannot fully understand, and the weight of this is something you carry. He leaves. He says something before he goes, something that sounds like instruction or information, perhaps about what will happen tomorrow, perhaps about what is expected of you. You cannot understand it. He knows you cannot understand it. He says it anyway, because saying it is what a person in his position does, because the ritual of explanation is meaningful even when the explanation cannot be received, and then he is gone into the dark street, and the tavern door swings behind him. The hours pass. The tavern empties gradually. Men finish their wine and leave, singly or in pairs, stepping from the lamplight into the darkness of the street with the practiced ease of people who have made this transition thousands of times, who know these streets by feel and long habit, who carry their social identity with them like armor that makes the darkness navigable. The tavern keeper and the woman who works with him, his wife, probably, or his companion of long standing, from the shorthand of their communication and the particular ease of their shared work, move through the closing rituals of their evening. Amphors re-racked, the counter wiped, the brazier banked down, remaining food put away in whatever storage serves that purpose. The lamp at the entrance extinguished, then most of the interior lamps, until the room is lit by a single lamp on the counter, its small flame the only light in the space. A young man, perhaps the tavern keeper's son or an enslaved member of the household, is sleeping in the far corner, curled on a mat. The tavern keeper and his companion disappear through a doorway at the back, and the curtain falls behind them, and the room is still. You are lying on the floor near the wall. The older man, before he arranged this, had indicated a spot, against the inner wall, away from the doorway, a position of relative shelter. You have your clothing for warmth, though warmth is not, on a summer night in Rome, the primary challenge. You have the hard stone of the floor. You lie and you look at the ceiling, which is invisible in the near darkness, and you listen to Rome. Rome at night sounds nothing like Rome in the day. The human traffic is gone, mostly, and in its absence, other things become audible. The creak and groan of building materials contracting as the day's heat releases. The sound of the Tiber, distant but real. You have not thought about the river for hours, but lying still in the dark you can hear it, or imagine you hear it, the low continuous sound of a large body of water moving through a city. The calls of the vigiles, somewhere in the streets, their patrol rounds marked by occasional shouts, the call and response of watchmen checking in with each other across the dark geography of their zone. The carts. The poets were not exaggerating. The carts begin within an hour of full dark, and they do not stop. The sound of wooden wheels on volcanic stone is a continuous percussion through the floors and walls, felt as much as heard, the vibration of Rome's logistics working its night shift. You feel it in your bones, lying on the stone floor, the tremor of a city that never entirely stops. Grain coming in from the Tiber ports, building materials from the warehouses at the river. The continuous provisioning of a city of 1 million people, conducted at night because the day is too full to permit it. Between the cart sounds, voices. Not many. The streets are not full of pedestrians at this hour, not in this neighborhood, not this deep into the night. But occasional voices, the voices of people who are out with purpose or necessity. A vigiles patrol, their voices brisk and professional. 2 men arguing about something, their voices close and then fading as they pass. A woman, once, crying, not close, muffled by distance and stone, in the way of someone crying alone, the particular quality of solitary grief. Rome in the dark is a city of sounds without faces. You do not sleep for a long time. The physical reasons are real. The floor is hard in a way that your body, conditioned to softer surfaces, has no framework for. The stone communicates every irregularity directly through clothing and skin. Positions that seem manageable for 5 minutes become painful by 15. You shift. You adjust. You find a new position. You shift again. But the physical reasons are not the primary ones. You lie on the floor of this tavern in the dark, and you go back through the day. You go back through it with the particular thoroughness that the mind applies to experiences it has not yet processed, experiences that were too large and too rapid to fully absorb in the moment. You go back through the alley, and the smell and the weight of the morning light. The first street, the first fountain, the baker's shop, the market and the food you could not have, the basilica and the looks you received, the forum, the three men crossing the open space toward you. You go back through the administrative station and the bureaucratic translation of your name into sounds that are not your sounds. The official who ran through his catalog of peoples and found nothing. The language specialist with his eyes closed, listening to your voice for clues. The bread, which was hard and perfect. The tavern and the lentils and the thin wine and the older man learning to say your name. You go back through all of it and you understand, more completely than you have understood anything today, what this day was actually about. It was not about the hunger, though the hunger was real and instructive. It was not about the thirst or the heat or the exhaustion or the sore feet or the language barrier. All of these things mattered. All of them contributed to the difficulty of the day, but none of them were the thing itself. The thing itself was this. You spent an entire day in a city of 1,000,000 people, and you belonged to none of it. Not to any street, not to any building, not to any family, not to any workshop, not to any community, not to any god. You walked through a world in which every single person, even the most destitute, even the man sitting against the wall near the livestock area with his blackened feet and his torn tunic, even the slave carrying water up 5 flights of stairs to an apartment he would never own, every single person existed in a network of acknowledged relationships that made them, however uncomfortably, a part of the city. They were known. They were placed. They were someone's responsibility or someone's owner or someone's client or someone's neighbor. You were none of these things. And a city is, at its most fundamental level, a system of mutual recognition, an agreement between large numbers of people to see each other, to acknowledge each other's presence and position, to participate in the collective project of organized life. A city is not buildings and roads and aqueducts, though these are magnificent. A city is the agreement. And you cannot join the agreement if you cannot speak its language, cannot demonstrate its documents, cannot trace the connections that prove you were part of it before. Rome did not persecute you today. Rome barely noticed you as an individual. What Rome did, what it does to everyone who exists within its boundaries, is demand coherence. Demand that you fit into the system that makes collective existence possible. And when you could not fit, when every attempt to categorize you failed, the system responded the way any complex organism responds to something it cannot identify. It became curious, then cautious, then procedural. The procedural response, the older man, the administrative station, the official with his catalog of peoples, was not the worst outcome. Far from it. It was, in its way, Rome's version of mercy, or at least of the kind of civic efficiency that produces mercy as a byproduct. Someone decided you were worth accounting for rather than disposing of. Tomorrow, the accounting will continue. The investigation is not finished. The wrong category that the official has provisionally assigned you will be tested against whatever evidence can be gathered, and the evidence will not support it. And a new category will need to be found, and the categories available to the Roman state for unidentifiable persons are limited, and none of them lead anywhere comfortable. You know this. You lie on the stone floor, and you know this with the flat clarity that comes from a day of education that has stripped away every modern assumption about what safety means, what rights mean, what identity means. Identity is not what you carry inside you. Identity is what the world around you can verify. Somewhere in the building above you, someone is moving. You can hear footsteps on wood, the sound of someone awake in an upper apartment, moving through their space in the particular careful way of someone trying not to disturb others. A child, perhaps, or an adult who can't sleep. The sound of life continuing, in all its intimate detail, above your head. Below you, the stone. The cart sounds continue their steady percussion from the streets. A dog, somewhere, has found something worth barking about, and is making its position on the subject clearly known, its voice carrying through the still night air with the unmodulated directness of a dog who has never learned that discretion exists. The lamp on the counter has burned low. Its flame is small now, barely more than a glow, the wick consuming the last of its oil. When it goes out, the room will be fully dark. You watch it from the floor, your cheek against the stone, watching the tiny flame with the specific attention that the very tired give to small things that they cannot control. The flame persists. It should have gone out 10 minutes ago, by your estimation, and yet it persists, smaller and smaller, flickering with the movement of air through the invisible gaps of the room, but persistent, maintaining its small warmth against the dark. You think about the man who gave you bread. You think about his name, the way you tried to say it, and he tried to hear your version of it. You think about the woman at the fountain who watched you drink and walked away, and the child who reached out one hand toward you in the crowd, and the official who searched his catalog with his eyes closed and found nothing. You think about the older man's gesture at the door of the administrative building, the gesture that meant follow me, that contained within it a provisional but real decision to take responsibility for this problem that you represented. And you think about what that gesture cost him and what it didn't cost him and why it happened, and you don't reach a conclusion about any of it. Rome is full of people making decisions within the logic of their world. The logic of their world is not yours. But it is not nothing. It is not barbaric or incomprehensible or beyond the reach of sympathy. It is the logic of a society that has survived and grown and administered itself across centuries. A society that has developed the tools it needed to manage the extraordinary challenge of organizing human life at urban scale in the ancient world. The tools are imperfect. The tools produce outcomes that a modern person would call unjust because they embed categories of inequality that modern societies have rejected, at least formally. But the people who use the tools are using them in accordance with the only understanding they have, the only understanding their world has provided. They saw something inexplicable. They investigated it. They provided for it minimally and provisionally, pending resolution. They went home. You are on the floor. The lamp goes out. The darkness that follows is complete in a way that darkness in modern life never is, because modern life leaks light into every corner through cracks under doors, and the glow of distant cities, and the phosphorescence of screens, and the pale suffusion of electrified sky. This darkness has none of that. This darkness is the darkness of the ancient world, the darkness that human beings lived inside for all but the most recent fraction of their history, the darkness before the light was permanently on. You cannot see the ceiling. You cannot see the counter. You cannot see the sleeping form of the boy in the corner. You can hear him breathing, and you can hear the building breathing, and you can hear the city moving in its nighttime register outside the shuttered front wall, and you can feel the stone beneath you communicating it's cold now that the day's heat has left it. You breathe. Your body is exhausted in a way that goes beyond the physical. The muscles ache. Yes, the feet, the legs, the shoulders carrying a day's worth of tension. But the exhaustion is also deeper, in the parts of you that manage the continuous work of existing in an incomprehensible environment, the cognitive labor of watching and reading and trying to navigate a world whose signals you can barely begin to decode. This exhaustion is the kind that sleep cannot entirely repair. You breathe, and you listen, and you let the darkness be dark. In the morning, and you know, lying here, that there will be a morning, that the darkness is not permanent, that the logic of time continues regardless of how impossible this particular span of it has felt. In the morning, the investigation will resume. The official will return or send someone. The older man will appear. The process of determining what you are and what is to be done with you will continue. It will continue with a thoroughness and a bureaucratic patience that Rome has applied to administrative problems for centuries, and it will eventually produce a conclusion. And the conclusion will place you somewhere in Rome's taxonomy of people. The taxonomy does not have a category for what you are. You know this. The taxonomy will find the nearest available approximation and apply it, and the application will be wrong, and you will exist within the wrongness of it, and whatever follows from that existence will not be of your choosing. But here is what you have learned today, on the stone floor, in the absolute dark of a Roman night, with a city of 1 million people breathing around you. You survived.